Section 1. The Yellow World. Springfield's first secret. Let's start with the color. You've been looking at it your whole life, and you've probably never stopped to think about what it actually means. That specific, unmistakable shade of yellow. The yellow that covers every face in Springfield. The yellow that coats the Simpsons family like a second skin. The yellow that has made this show recognizable from across any room, in any country, in any language, for over 36 years. It seems obvious, right? The Simpsons are yellow. That's just how they look. That's the art style. That's the brand. You see that yellow, and your brain immediately files the image under one category and moves on. But sit with it for a moment, because the story behind that specific color, the reason it exists, the way it was chosen, and what it has quietly communicated to audiences for 3.5 decades is one of the most interesting design decisions in television history. The color yellow was not the default. It was not the first choice. When Matt Groening brought his family of crude, sketchy, barely formed characters to producer James L. Brooks in the late 1980s, the original pitch didn't come with a predetermined palette. Groening had drawn his Simpson family on a piece of paper in the waiting room of Brooks's office, famously too nervous to present his original idea for a different project, and so sketching out these alternative characters almost as a backup, almost as a joke. They were rough. They were strange-looking. They had enormous eyes and overbites and proportions that didn't follow any conventional animation logic. And when the show was eventually developed and the question of color came up, the animator Georgie Palouse made a specific, deliberate, purposeful choice. She chose yellow because yellow, at the time, was the only color on a television screen that would look distinctly wrong if the television's color settings were miscalibrated. If your set was slightly off, if the hue was drifting, if the color temperature wasn't quite right, you would see it immediately because the Simpsons' faces would start bleeding into other colors. They'd go greenish or orangey or an unsettling shade of brown. The yellow was a calibration tool. It was designed to tell viewers their television was working correctly. That's the practical explanation, and it's a genuinely good one. But over 36 years, that functional color choice became something much larger than its original purpose. Yellow became identity. Yellow became brand. Yellow became the visual shorthand for an entire universe of characters and stories and emotions. The moment you see that shade, and it is a very specific shade, a warm, saturated, slightly cartoonish lemon yellow that doesn't quite match any natural human skin tone, your brain activates an entire archive of memory and association. Christmas specials and Halloween episodes and summer evenings, and the sound of a particular synthesizer melody playing over a familiar animated sky. And here is where the pattern gets genuinely interesting, because the yellow skin is not applied uniformly across the show's universe. This is something that rewards close attention. When a character from outside Springfield enters the show, a celebrity guest, a character visiting from another city, a person who exists in the real world or in some adjacent fictional world, they are drawn differently. Their skin is closer to a natural human tone. Their proportions are slightly more realistic. Their eyes sit at a different scale relative to their faces. They look, in the specific language of animation, more like people. Springfield residents look like Springfield residents. Everyone else looks like someone else. And this is not an accident of the animation style. The show has always used guest characters drawn in a more naturalistic style as a way to create visual contrast with the world they're entering. When the show's writers or directors want to signal that someone is an outsider, they don't need to write dialogue about it or have other characters comment on it. They simply draw that person differently. The visual language does the work. You see the character walk into Springfield, and before they've spoken a single line, before the plot has established anything about them, you already know something important about where they come from. Now set that observation next to what the show actually shows you about Springfield's environment, and something quietly unsettling begins to take shape. The show has been depicting a town with a nuclear power plant leaking radiation into its water supply since the very beginning. It has shown a three-eyed fish, documented in Season 2, pulled from a river directly downstream of that facility. It has shown safety inspections that found 342 violations at that plant. It has shown cracked cooling towers. It has shown radioactive waste being dumped in places it absolutely should not be. And through all of that, through every visual piece of evidence that something chemical or biological or nuclear has been doing something profound to the residents of this town. The show has given every single Springfield native that same specific shade of yellow skin. The outsiders don't have it. The outsiders look normal. The people who live inside the contamination zone look like the color yellow. Whether you read this as a deliberate narrative choice by the writers, as a fascinating coincidence of production design, or simply as an aesthetic quirk that accumulated meaning over decades, the pattern is real. The yellow is a marker. It separates the people of Springfield from every other character in the show's universe. And the show has been placing that marker on its characters for 36 years without ever once addressing it directly, without ever having a character look in a mirror and ask why their skin is that particular shade, without ever acknowledging on screen that there is anything unusual about a town where every single resident shares an identical, never-occurring-in-nature skin tone. Yellow also does something specific to the emotional register of any scene it appears in. There is considerable research in color psychology about how yellow functions in visual storytelling, and The Simpsons has been, whether intentionally or accidentally, leveraging that psychology for decades. Yellow is the color most associated with warmth in its literal sense: sunlight, candlelight, the light inside a house when you're standing outside in the dark looking in. It's the color that reads as inviting from a distance. It pulls you toward it. It suggests comfort and familiarity and the kind of soft light that exists in pleasant memories of childhood. The Simpsons' house on Evergreen Terrace is rendered in colors that read as warm even when the content of what's happening inside it is chaotic or difficult. Homer and Marge sit on that familiar orange couch in that familiar living room, and the palette of the scene communicates something independent of whatever they're actually doing or saying. It communicates home. The show made a choice, very early on and probably more intuitively than deliberately, to render its chaotic, dysfunctional, occasionally dark family sitcom in the colors of warmth and belonging. And that choice created an emotional effect that persists regardless of the episode's content. You can be watching an episode about Homer making a genuinely terrible decision with real consequences for his family, and the color palette of the scene is still speaking warmth, still speaking home, still pulling you gently toward the characters rather than pushing you away from them. This is part of why the show holds people so powerfully. Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's satirically brutal about American life and American families and American culture, the visual register remains inviting. The yellow holds you. And that yellow, that warmth, that visual invitation, it started with a single animator in the late 1980s, picking a color that would show up clearly on a cathode ray television screen. The function became the feeling. The technical became the emotional. And 36 years later, you can catch 3 seconds of a random episode on a screen across a restaurant, and your entire nervous system relaxes slightly because you recognize where you are and who those yellow people are and what the fact of their existence means. You're home. You're in Springfield. Everything is probably going to be fine. Now, within the yellow world, there are layers. The shade is not exactly constant across the show's entire run. In the early seasons, particularly the first 3 or 4, the yellow has a slightly different quality to it. It's a touch warmer, a touch more amber. The ink and paint methods used in those early years gave the colors a slightly handmade quality, a subtle variation from frame to frame that digital production later smoothed away. When you go back and watch Season 1 episodes now, the visual warmth is almost tangible. The characters look like they were made by human hands, which they were, and the imperfections of that process created a texture that subsequent seasons, for all their technical superiority, cannot quite reproduce. This is not a criticism. The show evolved. The production methods evolved. The visual language became more precise and more controlled as digital animation tools improved. But there is something in those early seasons, something in the slightly uncertain lines and the warmer, less perfectly saturated colors that carries an emotional quality which fans who grew up watching those episodes describe in specifically nostalgic terms. Not just nostalgia for the show. Nostalgia for the time when the show existed like that. For Saturday nights or Sunday evenings or whatever specific moment in their personal history the early Simpsons occupies. The yellow remembered from those early episodes carries that history inside it. When you see it, you don't just see a color. You see a time. The broader visual palette of Springfield extends well beyond yellow, of course. The show has always used color as narrative shorthand in ways that reward close watching. The nuclear power plant, which we'll return to several times throughout this journey, is rendered predominantly in grays and browns and a sort of institutional green, the palette of industrial neglect, of old concrete and corroded metal and fluorescent lighting over windowless rooms. Every time the show cuts to the interior of Burns's facility, the color temperature drops noticeably. The warmth that permeates the Simpson home, and to a lesser degree most of Springfield's residential spaces, drains away. You're in a colder, harder, more indifferent place. Springfield Elementary uses a similar palette of institutional drabness, though with occasional pops of brighter color that correspond to moments of genuine childhood imagination breaking through the grayness of the educational system. The library scenes, the art class scenes, the moments where Lisa finds some genuine intellectual joy, these tend to be slightly brighter than the surrounding visual environment, as if the show is using light to mark the places where something alive and genuine is happening. Moe's Tavern is almost always rendered in browns and shadows, which is doing obvious work for the emotional register of the place, but doing it so skillfully that you absorb the meaning without consciously registering the technique. Moe's is where people go when the rest of their life has temporarily failed. It is rendered in the colors of places where the lights are kept low because the people inside are more comfortable in the dark. The Simpson home itself changes color in interesting ways, depending on what's happening within it. The kitchen, where Marge spends so much of her time and which is the center of the family's domestic life, stays consistently warm. The living room, site of the family's collective existence, and the couch gag that opens every episode maintains that familiar orange and amber warmth. But Homer's workspace in the nuclear plant, the Sector 7G console that he sleeps at and eats at and barely engages with, is rendered in the plant's cold industrial palette, with Homer's yellow skin functioning almost as the single warm element in an otherwise colorless environment. He is the warmth the plant doesn't want. He is the human thing in the inhuman space. And all of this, every tint and hue and shade and color choice, begins with that single foundational decision to make the Simpsons family yellow, to give them that specific, slightly wrong, never quite natural skin tone that marks them as belonging to Springfield, to each other, and to a world that operates slightly differently from the one outside. 36 years of color, 36 years of yellow. And in that yellow, if you look at it long enough, you can see almost everything the show has ever wanted to say. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I genuinely love seeing people's locations from all over the world. And if you're settling in for the long version of this, make sure you're subscribed so the next one finds you. Section 2. The Forgotten Language of the Couch Gag. Every episode of The Simpsons begins the same way. Almost. The same music, the same sequence of Springfield coming into view, the same family racing home from their respective corners of the city, the same living room, the same couch, and then something different. Something that changes every single time. Something that the casual viewer absorbs in about 8 seconds and immediately forgets as the episode proper begins. The couch gag. In 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes, the couch gag has been a constant structural element of the show, and it has been hiding one of the most sophisticated pieces of visual storytelling in the history of animated television inside something that most people treat as a throwaway opening joke. The couch gag is not a throwaway. The couch gag is a language that the show has been speaking since 1990 and has never stopped developing. Let's back up to the beginning of the sequence itself, before we get to what the couch gag does, because the sequence that leads into it is itself rich with pattern. The opening of The Simpsons, the sequence that begins with those famous syncopated notes, the Danny Elfman theme that you could hum in your sleep and probably have, is one of the most recognized pieces of television grammar in existence. The town scrolls by. Springfield reveals itself in fragments. The power plant, with its 4 iconic cooling towers and their characteristic three-dimensional shape, the downtown area with its unremarkable main street that somehow manages to contain references to dozens of different American small towns simultaneously. The school, the park, the homes, and each member of the family travels home to that couch from a different starting point, their own world, their own corner of Springfield. Homer leaves the plant with a glowing piece of plutonium that he casually, almost thoughtlessly, tucks into his collar and then loses somewhere in the car. Marge drives home through Springfield's familiar streets with Maggie in the front seat. The car pulls into the Quickie Mart for a moment, and in a joke that most people absorb without consciously processing, Maggie gets rung up at the register along with the groceries, her price tag reading $1.09 in the early seasons and later changing to reflect different economic commentary, and Marge scoops her back into her arms as they leave. Lisa races out of band practice on her bicycle after playing an extended saxophone solo that gets her thrown out of the rehearsal room. Bart writes something different on the chalkboard in Principal Skinner's classroom. Always a punishment line, always slightly different from the last episode, always a small joke that the show slides past you in about 2 seconds and then skateboards home through town. All of this is happening simultaneously, in different parts of the city, and the show cuts between them with the rhythmic precision of a musical piece because that's what the opening sequence is. It's choreographed to the Elfman theme in a way that makes the visual and the audio feel like a single unified object rather than a piece of music playing over an animation. Every element of this sequence has been adjusted and tweaked and updated over the years. The couch gag changes every episode. The chalkboard punishment line changes every episode. In the early seasons, the price tag on Baby Maggie read different things in different episodes. The extended saxophone solo Lisa plays has changed. The clouds Homer passes through on his way down from whatever elevation he's been elevated to, these have changed. The TV set showing in the living room window as the family runs past it has shown different things. The family itself, in later seasons and in special episodes, has been replaced with different characters, different art styles, different genres entirely. But the rhythm of it never changes. The structure never changes. Wherever this episode is going, whatever darkness or comedy or emotion the next 22 minutes contain, you always begin here, in this sequence, in this particular rhythm, and the familiarity of that rhythm is doing something very specific to your nervous system before the episode has even started. You are being told that you are home. You are being told that whatever comes next, it is happening in a familiar place, with familiar people, and that the terms of engagement are established and safe. The opening sequence is a container. It holds the episode inside a frame of comfort before releasing it. Now, the couch gag. In its simplest form, the form it takes most often, particularly in earlier seasons, the couch gag is just a quick joke that interrupts the family's arrival on the couch. They run in. Something unexpected happens. They sit down anyway, or they can't sit down, or they're somewhere else entirely instead of on the couch. 15 seconds later, the episode begins. But the couch gag grew. It expanded. It developed ambitions that no one in 1989 could have predicted a piece of 8-second throwaway animation could ever have. By the middle seasons of the show, couch gags were sometimes running 2 or 3 minutes longer than some segments of the episode proper. By the later seasons, they were bringing in outside directors, outside artists, outside animators to create elaborate set pieces that pushed the visual language of the show into places it had never gone. Bill Plimpton directed couch gags. Don Hertzfeldt directed couch gags. Guillermo del Toro's couch gag for the Treehouse of Horror episode in 2013 is essentially a 2-minute love letter to horror cinema, packed with references that reward multiple rewatches. And all of this accumulated meaning, all of this layering of creativity and ambition and outside perspective on top of the same 8-second structural slot created something that functions, in the show's long history, as a kind of visual diary. You can read the mood of the show's creative team in the couch gags of any given season. When the writers and animators are energized and experimentally minded, the couch gags get strange and ambitious. When the show is running on a steadier, more confident rhythm, the couch gags are tighter and more joke-focused. When the show is in a period of self-reflection, a period of thinking about its own history and its own place in culture, the couch gags tend to reference the show's past, to quote earlier couch gags, or to build jokes that only work if you've been watching since the beginning. There is a specific couch gag, one of the most analyzed in the show's history, that runs through what appears to be the entire history of human civilization to arrive at the Simpson family on the couch. Prehistoric Simpsons. Medieval Simpsons. Simpsons from every era of human history, with the nuclear family arriving last and taking their seats in the living room as if the entirety of human evolution was simply the delivery mechanism for this specific moment. It's played as a joke, Of course, the show plays almost everything as a joke, but the structure of the joke is saying something. It's saying that the Simpson family on that couch is, from a certain perspective, the point, the destination, the thing everything else was building toward. That's an enormous amount of meaning to load into something most people experience as a punchline and immediately forget. The couch gag also functions, in ways that have been gradually recognized over the years, as a kind of tone setter for individual episodes. Not always. Not consistently in a way that you can pin down and formalize into a rule. But there is a pattern in how the energy of the couch gag relates to the energy of the episode that follows it. Episodes with quiet, simple, almost nostalgic couch gags tend to be more emotionally sincere episodes, the ones where something genuinely affecting is going to happen. Episodes with elaborate, visually chaotic, reference-heavy couch gags tend to be the more experimental or comedically ambitious episodes. It's as if the couch gag is a small piece of throat clearing, an adjustment of register before the show settles into whatever it's planning to do for the next 20 minutes. This is not a coincidence of production. The couch gag is chosen and produced by the same creative team making the episode. The choice of what couch gag to pair with what episode is a creative decision, even when it's a practical one about runtime or a recycled gag from earlier in the season. The pairing has meaning, even if that meaning is sometimes accidental. One of the most quietly interesting patterns in the couch gag sequence is how it handles the family's arrival specifically, how it handles the question of completeness. The standard couch gag, even in its most abstract or surreal form, almost always ends with the full family together in some configuration in or near the living room. The five of them, Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie, may be in different forms, different sizes, different physical states, but they arrive together. The gag may involve aliens or alternate dimensions or time travel or elaborate physical comedy, but the family unit completes itself. In the relatively rare couch gags where one family member is missing, or where the family is replaced entirely by different characters, or where the couch itself is absent, the emotional effect is subtly unsettling even within the comedy. The absence of any of the five feels wrong. The brain registers the incompleteness before the joke has finished landing. This speaks to something the show has understood about its own emotional architecture from very early on. The Simpson family is a gestalt. The power of the unit comes from all five of them together. Remove any one element and something fundamental changes. Remove all of them and you're just looking at a piece of furniture. The couch, incidentally, deserves its own moment of attention because the couch on Evergreen Terrace is one of the most carefully sustained pieces of set design in animated television history. It is orange. It is always orange. In the specific, slightly faded shade of orange that suggests it has been there for a while, that it is a piece of furniture that has absorbed the weight of a family over years, that it carries the history of every evening spent sitting on it. It is not a new couch. It was never presented as a new couch. Even in the show's first season, when the Simpson family were themselves relatively new characters finding their shape, the couch looked like it had been there for a long time. The couch has a physical presence that the rest of the living room's furniture doesn't quite match. The television, the lamp, the picture of a sailboat on the wall, these are background elements, scenery in the technical sense. The couch is something more. The couch is the end point. The couch is where the family arrives and rests and watches television and falls asleep and argues and makes up and simply exists together in proximity. It is the gravitational center of their domestic life. And so the couch gag, in its repetition across 800 episodes, across 36 years, across every configuration of family and every style of animation and every degree of experimental ambition the show has ever brought to bear on its own opening sequence, the couch gag is really a meditation on arriving home, on the fact of the family gathering at the end of the day or the beginning of the story or wherever this particular point in time places them. The joke is always different. The meaning is always the same. You come home, you find your place, you sit down, and the story begins. Beyond the couch gag proper, the opening sequence contains layers of detail that the show has used, very deliberately over the years, as a kind of running commentary on its own state of being. The chalkboard punishment lines that Bart writes at the beginning of each episode are perhaps the most analyzed piece of recurring visual text in the show's history, and the body of them stretching back to 1989 and continuing in some form to the present is genuinely interesting as a record of what the show was thinking about at any given moment. The early chalkboard lines were fairly straightforward. Punishment jokes, the format of "I will not do the thing Bart presumably did," or "I am not the thing Bart presumably claimed to be." They were quick, they were slightly edgy in the context of late 1980s network animation, and they established Bart's character more efficiently than several episodes' worth of dialogue could have. He is the kid who gets in trouble. He is the kid who is always being punished for something. And he is the kid who, even in the act of writing his punishment, seems to be enjoying himself. Over the years, the chalkboard lines grew more self-referential, more meta, more aware of the show's own history and its own position in culture. Lines that referenced the show's longevity, lines that addressed criticism of the show's quality, lines that responded to current events or cultural moments in ways that were sharp and fast and demanded that you already know what the joke was referencing to fully appreciate it. The chalkboard became, in a sense, the show's public face, the part of itself that it offered to the audience as a direct address before pulling back into the fictional world of the episode. And the extended saxophone solo, which is easy to experience as just a musical flourish in the opening sequence, has also quietly accumulated its own body of variation and meaning over the years. In the earliest episodes, the solo is relatively contained. Lisa plays something, gets expelled from the rehearsal room, moves on, but as the seasons progressed, the solo became more elaborate, more varied, sometimes playing with jazz standards or classical pieces or whatever musical reference felt appropriate to the moment or the episode or the season. Lisa's musicianship, which is a central and beautifully handled part of her character throughout the show's run, is actually established and reinforced in those few seconds before the episode begins. Every time you hear that saxophone solo in the opening, you are being reminded effortlessly and without exposition that Lisa is the one in this family who has something to say and a language she's developed to say it. The opening sequence is, in summary, a piece of television that is more sophisticated and more carefully constructed than it appears. It seems like a branding exercise, a familiar tune and a set of recognizable images that tell you what show you're watching. And it is that. But it's also doing considerably more than that. And the more you watch it with genuine attention, the more you realize that the show has been speaking to you in the opening credits every single episode, making choices and adjustments and sending signals, and most of the time the message slips past you unnoticed, which is, when you think about it, exactly the kind of communication The Simpsons has always been best at. Section 3. Every background detail that tells a deeper story. The rule in professional animation, the one that gets taught in classrooms and passed down through studios and applied with varying degrees of discipline across the industry, is that nothing in a frame should be accidental. Every element of every scene, every piece of background decoration, every poster on a wall, every object on a desk, every vehicle on a street should serve some purpose, whether narrative or atmospheric or tonal. The frame is a controlled space, and what exists inside it is a choice. The Simpsons, across its 36-year run, has applied this principle with extraordinary consistency and with a level of wit and detail that rewards rewatching in a very specific way. The foreground of any given scene is where the story lives. The background is where the show is having a completely separate, entirely optional conversation with viewers who are paying a different kind of attention. Let's start with the quick E-Mart, because Apu's convenience store is one of the most densely detailed recurring backgrounds in the show's history, and one of the locations that has accumulated the most layered visual storytelling over the seasons. The quick E-Mart is a small space, a corner store, aisles of products, a counter, a cash register, some magazine racks, a hot dog warmer, a Slurpee machine. These are the core elements, and they remain consistent across every appearance of the store across the show's entire run. But the specific products on the shelves, the specific magazines in the rack, the specific items behind the counter, the specific signs posted at various heights around the interior. These change from episode to episode and from scene to scene, and they tell tiny stories of their own. The magazines in the rack behind the counter are particularly rich. Over the course of the series, the show has used this small piece of background real estate to host dozens of completely invented magazine titles, most of them jokes about the nature of the publication category they're parodying, all of them visible for about half a second before the scene moves on. Non-threatening boys magazine, people who look like things magazine, a hunting publication for cats, an investment guide for criminals. These aren't gags that the show draws attention to. They exist in the background, visible if you happen to look at exactly the right place at exactly the right moment, and completely invisible if you don't. They reward the viewer who pauses, who rewinds, who watches the same scene 3 times, because something in their peripheral vision suggested there was something there. This is a specific pleasure that The Simpsons offers that very few other television shows do: the pleasure of discovery. Of finding something in a background that you missed the first time. Of realizing that the show was saying something clever in a space you weren't looking at, in a moment you weren't paying the right kind of attention. The show doesn't need you to find these things. The episode works perfectly well without them. But for the viewer who does find them, who does catch the background joke or the hidden reference or the visual pun sitting 3 layers behind the main action, the experience of watching the show takes on a different texture. It feels collaborative. It feels like the show is in conversation with you specifically, even though you know intellectually that it's in conversation with everyone who happens to look at the right thing at the right time. The quick E-Mart's product shelves have, over the years, hosted products that are themselves elaborate jokes, compressed into single words or short phrases, visible for milliseconds on a label. Lard Lad Donuts now with only lard. Duff Beer, it's beer. Springfield natural spring water pumped from the river near Burns's plant. That last one may not be exactly real, but the spirit of it is the show has consistently used its product labels and store signage as miniature editorials on the things the products represent and the system that produces and sells them. The Simpsons' home on Evergreen Terrace offers a different kind of background reward. The house's interior, particularly the living room and kitchen, accumulates detail slowly, across years of episodes, in ways that create a genuine sense of a lived-in space. The picture of a sailboat that hangs in the living room, the specific trophies and ribbons and school projects that appear on the walls and shelves of the children's rooms, the refrigerator covered in drawings and magnets that changes its contents episode by episode, the kitchen's specific arrangement of appliances, cookbooks, and miscellaneous domestic detritus that Marge navigates with the practiced ease of someone who has organized this particular space 1,000 times and knows where everything is. What the home backgrounds are doing is something that set designers in live-action television understand and work toward deliberately: the creation of a convincing domestic history. The sense that this family has been living here for a long time, that things have accumulated, that the space is shaped by the people who inhabit it rather than by the people who designed the set. In live-action television, this requires physical prop departments and set dressers and continuity supervisors. In animation, it requires someone choosing to draw a specific detail in a specific place and maintaining it across hundreds of episodes. The Simpsons has been more successful at this than almost any other animated series in history, which is interesting given that the show actively uses its premise: the floating timeline, the episodic reset, the way continuity works loosely rather than tightly to avoid the kind of accumulated change that would logically follow from a family living in a space for 36 years. The house doesn't age. The furniture doesn't wear out in visible ways. The appliances don't get updated to reflect changing technology. But the density of detail, the sense that the background is full and inhabited and specific, creates the illusion of history even without the fact of it. Springfield itself, as a town, is one of the most richly detailed fictional settings in American entertainment. The background artists who have maintained and extended Springfield's geography over the decades have created a civic space that is internally consistent in its inconsistency, a place that follows its own visual rules, even as it defies any mapping that would relate it to real American geography. The town's main street, its government buildings, its park, its hospital, its school, its nuclear plant, its stadium, its airport, its many bars and restaurants and specialty shops. All of these exist in a kind of hovering relationship to each other that defies actual city planning, but feels, within the show's visual logic, completely coherent. The background details that populate these civic spaces tell their own stories. The graffiti in certain alleys of Springfield comments on local politics and local personalities in ways that no character ever reads aloud. The store signs on Main Street are frequently elaborate jokes about commerce and capitalism and American retail culture. The church's notice board, a small but recurring piece of background signage, has over the years hosted some of the show's most quietly perfect one-liners. The kind of thing you'd see on an actual church notice board that still manages to be completely specific to the show's universe and its understanding of organized religion as practiced in small-town America. Reverend Lovejoy's church notice board deserves particular attention because it is, in its small way, one of the most consistent repositories of dry wit in the show's entire run. The messages on that board change with every episode that features the church exterior, and they range from the theologically earnest to the theologically confused to the theologically despairing, in ways that say something specific about the Lovejoy character, a man who entered the ministry with presumably genuine faith and has been slowly exhausted by the particular demands of ministering to Springfield's population without the show ever having to articulate that observation directly. Come in and be bored. God welcomes his victims. We're not like other churches. 7th annual poverty banquet dress down. These are the kinds of messages that exist in the background, visible for a second or two during an establishing shot of the church exterior, and they are doing characterization work on Reverend Lovejoy and thematic work on the show's relationship with religion in ways that the main plot of any given episode might not address at all. The show's visual world contains hundreds of these small background editorials. They are the show thinking out loud in spaces where its characters aren't currently speaking. They are the creative team's voice, distinct from the characters' voices, commenting on the world the show is depicting from inside the frame of that world. When you learn to look for them, when your eyes start automatically scanning the periphery of scenes for the small things that might be saying something, the show becomes a measurably richer experience. Burns's office and the nuclear plant's interior deserve specific attention as background environments, because the show has used these spaces to do some of its most careful visual characterization. Burns's office is a Victorian space inside a mid-century industrial facility, an aesthetic that shouldn't work but somehow does, because it communicates something true about Burns as a character. He is an anachronism. He is a person from a different century, operating in a modern world that he relates to primarily through the lens of his century-old value system. His office looks like it belongs in the house of an 1890s industrialist, because that is essentially what Burns is. The dark wood paneling, the oil portraits, the deep leather chairs, the globe that's probably out of date. These background elements are not decoration. They are characterization delivered visually, continuously, across every scene that takes place in that space. The walls of Burns's office have been shown in various episodes to contain portraits and memorabilia that reference his extraordinarily long life. A photograph with historical figures who have been dead for decades. A trophy from a sporting event that took place before most living humans were born. A chart of holdings and investments that extends back to an era when the word corporation meant something quite different than it does now. These background details are not episode's main focus. They exist in the periphery of scenes about other things. But they accumulate, across seasons and episodes, into a genuinely strange portrait of a man who has been alive long enough to collect a Victorian-era office's worth of evidence of that longevity. Homer's workstation in Sector 7G is almost the inverse of Burns's office in terms of what it communicates. Where Burns's space is dense with history and personal possession and the markers of a long life deliberately curated, Homer's workstation is cluttered with the residue of a life lived without much deliberate intention. Coffee rings, half-eaten food, a can of food presumably used as a paperweight at some point, buttons and switches that may or may not be labeled correctly, and that Homer's relationship with is, at best, casual. A personal photograph of his family that sits in a frame that's slightly crooked and has been shown in various states of being covered by other accumulated objects. The workstation background tells you exactly who Homer is and how he relates to his job, and why the fact that this is the person operating this particular piece of equipment in this particular kind of facility is, depending on your level of concern about nuclear safety, either very funny or very alarming. The background world of Springfield is always available for this kind of reading. It's always speaking. The trick is learning the rhythm of it, learning when to pull your attention away from the main action and let your eyes drift toward the edges of the frame, where the show is having its own quiet conversations about itself and its characters and the world it's depicting. Once you learn that rhythm, you can't quite watch the show the same way. You find yourself pausing on establishing shots that you would have previously absorbed in a second. You find yourself reading signs in the background of scenes while the characters in the foreground are saying something completely different. You find yourself noticing the way a background detail in episode 1 of a season seems to rhyme with a foreground moment in episode 12. The show is dense with this kind of connection, this kind of visual thinking, and most of it lives in the background, patient and quiet, waiting for the right pair of eyes to find it. Springfield's background world is its own story. In some ways, it's a more honest story than the one the characters are telling, because the characters are embedded in the loop, in the reset, in the floating timeline, in the narrative necessities of episodic storytelling. The backgrounds don't reset in quite the same way. The background details accumulate across the show's history in ways that the characters' lives officially cannot. They remember things the characters have forgotten. They carry history that the plot has abandoned. They are the show's unconscious, visible, and readable to anyone willing to look in the right direction. Section 4. The music hidden inside the show. Danny Elfman wrote the theme in a single sitting. This is one of those facts about the show that gets mentioned occasionally and then passed over quickly, because it seems like it should either be more remarkable or less remarkable than it is. A single sitting. He was given the brief, he sat down, and he produced what would become one of the most recognizable pieces of television music in history in a period of time that various accounts place at somewhere between a few hours and a single day. The theme is, on one level, simply brilliant pop composition. It has the structure of a very short piece of orchestral comedy music, bright brass, clarinet, the particular swooping quality that characterizes Elfman's cartoon writing, a main motif that's immediately memorable, and that lodges in the brain with the efficiency of a perfectly constructed hook. It sounds like it's having fun. It sounds like the show it introduces. It sounds right in a way that defies precise analysis. But underneath the obvious pleasure of it, the Elfman theme is doing something structurally interesting that becomes clearer when you listen to it as a piece of music rather than as a television signature. The theme is built around a specific harmonic instability, a kind of deliberate, playful refusal to resolve in exactly the way you expect it to, landing on cadences that are satisfying but slightly off, slightly unexpected. The rhythm has a bounce and a syncopation that keeps it from ever feeling completely settled, completely at rest. It is comfortable but restless, familiar but slightly unpredictable, which is, of course, a perfect musical description of the show itself. A show that lives in comfortable familiarity, the same family, the same town, the same rhythms of domestic life, but that is always doing something slightly unexpected within that familiarity. A show that resolves every episode in broadly predictable ways, but that keeps you engaged by the quality of what happens in between the predictable beginning and the predictable end. The music understood the show before the show had fully understood itself. Alf Clausen, who served as the show's primary composer and musical director for nearly 3 decades, built an extraordinary body of work on top of the Elfman Foundation. Clausen's approach to scoring the show and his approach to the musical numbers that became an increasingly important part of its identity as the series progressed reflected the context of this specific show and these specific characters. The scoring of individual episodes in The Simpsons follows a pattern that is worth understanding because it explains a lot about how the show creates its emotional effects. Standard dramatic television scoring operates on a principle of reinforcement. The music tells you how to feel about what you're seeing. Something sad happens and the score gets melancholic. Something triumphant happens and the brass swells. The music leads the audience's emotional response. The Simpsons scoring, particularly in the classic seasons, often worked on a principle of slight disconnection. The score doesn't always match the emotional register of what's happening on screen. A moment of genuine pathos might be underscored with music that's slightly too bouncy, too cheerful, in a way that creates an interesting cognitive effect. You're sad about what you're watching, but the music isn't confirming that you should be sad, which makes the sadness feel more private, more personal, more genuinely felt rather than manufactured. Conversely, a moment of absurd comedy might be scored with something unexpectedly sincere, which heightens the joke by treating it with more gravity than it deserves. This technique, using the score to work against the obvious emotional grain of a scene rather than reinforcing it, is one of the most sophisticated and least discussed elements of the show's craft. Clausen understood that in a show where the animation style is already slightly removed from naturalism, where the characters exist at a comfortable cartoon distance from the viewer, the scoring needed to be careful not to push emotional effects too hard. Hard emotional pushing in that context tips into manipulation, and The Simpsons at its best never wants to feel like it's manipulating you. It wants to feel like it's telling you the truth and letting you have whatever feelings the truth produces. The musical numbers deserve their own extended examination because they are one of the most underappreciated aspects of the show's artistic achievement. The Simpsons is, among its many other things, a musical show. Not a musical in the formal sense of a show that tells its stories primarily through song, but a show that has, across its run, produced an astonishing number of original songs of genuine quality, performed by its characters in ways that illuminate character in ways that regular dialogue cannot. The first major musical number in the show's history, the number that established the pattern and proved that this was going to be something the show could do, wanted to do, and could do extremely well, is arguably See My Vest from Season 6. Mr. Burns, in an episode inspired loosely by the plot of 101 Dalmatians, reveals to Homer and Marge his collection of bizarre and ethically troubling garments made from exotic animals, and he does it through a full production number in the style of a classic Broadway villain song. See My Vest works on several levels simultaneously. It's funny unambiguously, immediately funny as a parody of a specific type of show-stopping villain number. It's effective characterization, because it tells you something about Burns through his choice of musical genre that couldn't be conveyed through dialogue. He is theatrical, he is self-aware about his own villainy in a way that takes genuine pleasure in the performance of it, and he has the kind of old-fashioned showmanship that belongs to his era and his disposition. And it's genuinely well-written as a piece of musical comedy, with internal rhymes and a structure that rewards the kind of close listening that makes a song enjoyable to hear more than once. The show went on from there to produce musical numbers that cover an extraordinary range of style and emotional register. Gentle melodies sung by Lisa that carried genuine heartbreak, full Broadway production numbers staged in Homer's imagination or in the show's willfully theatrical version of Springfield. Parody songs that accomplish what good parody always accomplishes, both functioning as the thing they're parodying and saying something true about it simultaneously. And occasional numbers of such genuine quality that they transcend their context and exist as simply good songs, regardless of where they came from or what animated character performed them. You're checking in from the episode where Homer joins a musical group and ends up in a rehabilitation program, is a gospel-inflected anthem that is aggressively funny as a parody of inspirational 12-step programming, while also being, in its musical bones, a genuinely rousing piece of choral composition. The humor doesn't undercut the music doesn't undercut the humor. They coexist in that specific way that the best musical comedy achieves your laughing and you're moved simultaneously, and neither response cancels out the other. The background musical landscape of Springfield, the non-diegetic score, the pieces that play under scenes rather than being performed by characters, also contains patterns that reward extended listening. Clausen developed a vocabulary of recurring musical phrases and themes over his decades with the show, pieces that were associated with specific characters or locations or emotional registers, and that could be deployed across episodes to create a sense of musical continuity even within the show's otherwise largely non-continuous structure. The music that plays under Burns scenes has a specific quality to it, something vaguely Wagnerian, something that invokes old money and dark rooms and power exercised without restraint. The music under Marge scenes, particularly scenes where she is at home, doing the domestic work that holds the family together, tends towards something warmer and slightly more melancholic, the sound of a person who has chosen to contain herself within a smaller life than her capabilities might have supported, and who lives that choice with complicated grace. The music under Lisa's scenes when Lisa is alone, when Lisa is thinking, when Lisa is watching the world around her and finding it inadequate, tends toward jazz, toward the specific idiom of her saxophone, as if the score is speaking in her language even when she isn't playing. These musical characterizations are subtle. They don't announce themselves. You don't watch an episode and think, the music is telling me something about Marge right now. You simply feel something slightly different in the emotional atmosphere of a Marge-centered scene versus a Burns-centered scene, versus a Lisa-centered scene, and part of what's producing that difference is in the music that's running underneath the dialogue and the animation. The Simpsons Christmas special, Simpsons roasting on an open fire. The show's first full episode established early that the show was willing to use music with genuine emotional ambition. The climax of that episode, with Homer bringing home Santa's little helper as the family's Christmas present after a disastrous attempt to win money at the dog track, is scored in a way that is remarkably unguarded. The music doesn't wink. It doesn't undercut the moment or protect the show from the accusation of sentiment. It simply plays the emotion honestly, trusting the audience to receive it without embarrassment. That willingness to play emotion honestly through music to let the score commit fully to a moment's genuine feeling, even within a show that built its reputation on irony and satire and the careful management of viewer expectation, is one of the things that has sustained the show's emotional power over decades. The music knows when to be funny and it knows when to simply be true. The best episodes are the ones where those two registers work in the same direction. Alf Clausen's departure from the show in 2017 after nearly 3 decades was a significant transition that fans of the show's musical life noticed immediately. His replacement, with a different approach to composition and a different relationship to the show's musical history, marked a genuine change in the sound of Springfield, a change that's easier to hear than to articulate, but that exists as one of the clearest dividing lines in the show's long sonic history. This is not a judgment about quality. It's an observation about difference. The show has always been changing, is always being changed by the people making it at any given moment, and its musical identity is no exception. What Clausen built over nearly 30 years is a body of music that is inseparable from the show's identity, in the same way that the Elfman theme is inseparable from its opening. You cannot unhear it. You cannot watch classic Simpsons episodes without the score being part of how you experience them, part of what makes them feel right and complete and like themselves. The music is the room the stories happen inside. And once you start listening to it as a distinct element, once you pull it out of the background of your attention and actually hear it, the show reveals another layer of itself, another conversation happening underneath the one you've been following all along. Section 5. The Architecture of Springfield. A town built on purpose. Springfield as a piece of urban design is impossible. This is not an observation about its fictional status. Of course it's a fictional town. Of course it doesn't need to follow the logic of real urban planning. The impossibility is more specific than that. Springfield is impossible in the sense that it appears to have been designed by someone who took every type of American city and small town that exists and assembled them into a single location that simultaneously embodies all of them. This is not an accident. It is one of the show's most deliberate and most sophisticated design choices, and understanding why the town was built this way and what the specific elements of its impossible civic design communicate about American life and American self-understanding adds a layer to the viewing experience that operates entirely below the level of conscious attention for most viewers most of the time. Let's begin with what Springfield actually contains, spatially and architecturally, and why the coexistence of these elements is so revealing. Springfield has a nuclear power plant. This immediately places it in a specific category of American town, the kind of town that exists in a relationship of profound economic dependency with a large industrial facility. These are real towns. They exist throughout the American Midwest and South and Northeast. Towns where a single employer, a steel mill, a chemical plant, an auto factory, a nuclear facility provides a majority of the local employment and exercises. Through that employment, a profound gravitational pull on the social, political, and civic life of the community. These towns have a specific character. They tend to be economically stratified in particular ways, with the facility's management class and ownership living in a different relationship to the town than the workers who actually staff the facility. They tend to have civic institutions that exist in various degrees of dependency on the facility's tax revenues and corporate goodwill. They tend to have local politics that are shaped, subtly or unsubtly, by the interests of the facility and its owners. Springfield's relationship with Burns's nuclear plant has all of these characteristics. The town's economy depends on the plant. The town's political culture is shaped by Burns's interests and money. The civic institutions, the school that loses funding when Burns decides to cut his charitable giving, the hospital whose resources are stretched by a population that may be experiencing elevated rates of radiation-related illness, the local government that consistently fails to hold Burns accountable for the plant's safety violations, all exist in the shadow of the plant's presence. But Springfield also has a harbor, and a mountain, and what appears to be significant farmland within commutable distance, and a desert, and sometimes an ocean, and a ski resort, and a canyon. These are not the geographic features of an industrial town in the American Midwest. These are the geographic features of everywhere. What the show has built is not a realistic representation of any specific type of American place. It has built a composite of all the places Americans live and all the landscapes Americans recognize. When you watch Springfield, you see the industrial town you grew up in, or the small town your grandparents live in, or the mid-sized city you moved to for work, or the coastal community you visited on vacation. Springfield is all of these places at once because the show was designed to be recognizable to the broadest possible American audience, and the broadest possible American audience lives in an enormous variety of different kinds of places. The architecture of the specific buildings in Springfield follows a similar composite logic. The Simpson home is a quintessential post-war American suburban house, the kind of place that was built by the millions in the 1950s and 1960s, as the middle class expanded and suburban development became the dominant form of American residential real estate. It's not large, it's not small. It has the specific proportions of a place built to be functional rather than beautiful, comfortable rather than impressive, adequate for a working family rather than aspirational. The Simpson home's aesthetic is not chosen by its characters, it was chosen before them, by a system of housing development that produced millions of essentially identical houses across the country in the decades after World War II. The Flanders home next door is almost identical in structure, but maintained with a degree of care that places it in a slightly different category, the category of a house where someone cares about the impression it makes, where the lawn is more carefully tended, and the paintwork is more recently refreshed, and the general condition suggests a relationship to domestic maintenance that differs from the Simpsons' somewhat less attentive approach. The architecture is the same. The relationship to that architecture reveals the character difference. Springfield Elementary is a building that any American who attended a public school in the middle decades of the 20th century would recognize immediately. The specific shade of institutional paint, the layout of a building designed for efficient crowd management rather than for the pleasure of the people who spend their time in it, the administrative offices positioned at the center of the building, with corridors radiating outward in ways that optimize supervision over the student population. It is the architecture of a system of a public institution built during an era when public institutions were funded adequately but not generously, and when the goal of those institutions was the production of functional citizens rather than the cultivation of individual human beings. The show has always understood that Principal Skinner's relationship with the school building is one of love and despair in roughly equal measure. He loves it the way people love the institutions they were shaped by, even when those institutions were imperfect or constraining. He despairs of it the way people despair of things they are responsible for maintaining with inadequate resources. The building's design mirrors the paradox of his position. He is the administrator of something that was never meant to be administered by someone who cared too much. Moe's Tavern is one of the show's most carefully designed recurring environments, and one that does the most specific sociological work of any location in Springfield. The tavern exists in a particular tradition of American drinking establishments, the neighborhood bar, the local, the place where people go, not primarily to drink, though they do drink, but to exist in the company of other people who share their geography and their class position and their general situation. Moe's is not a sports bar or a cocktail lounge or a gastropub. It is a working-class tavern of the specifically American Rust Belt tradition, a place where men who work difficult jobs come to decompress in the company of men who work the same or similar difficult jobs, and where the proprietor is a person whose own situation is not substantially different from that of his customers. The interior design of Moe's, and design is perhaps the wrong word, since the space feels like it came together the way an organism grows rather than the way a space is designed, includes several elements that accumulate meaning across the show's history. The jar of pickled eggs that nobody ever appears to actually purchase, the dartboard on the wall, the specific arrangement of bottles behind the bar that Moe knows by heart and navigates with the automatic ease of long practice. The television mounted in a corner that is sometimes showing a sporting event, and sometimes showing a news report, and sometimes showing something that is itself a small visual joke that you'd only catch if you happen to look at it at exactly the right moment. There is also the bar phone, which has its own history in the show. It's the site of the running gag where Bart calls the bar and asks Moe for a fictitious patron, with a name that sounds normal until Moe announces it to the bar and realizes he's been pranked again. The gag is one of the most repeated in the show's early seasons, and it works as well on the 18th repetition as the first, because what makes it funny is not the specific name, though the specific names are often very good, but the relationship between Bart's commitment to the bit and Moe's combination of fury and helplessness in the face of it. But the bar phone also serves as a recurring piece of architecture in the social landscape of Moe's. It's the mechanism through which the outside world intrudes on the tavern's self-contained existence. Characters receive calls at the bar. Plot points develop through the phone. The existence of the bar phone as a permanent fixture of the space says something about the relationship between the tavern and the world outside it. The world keeps calling, keeps interrupting, keeps insisting on its own continued existence, even in a space that exists partially to provide refuge from it. The church building that houses Reverend Lovejoy's congregation is another piece of Springfield architecture with its own particular set of associations. It is a small Protestant church of the New England congregational type, white, wooden, with a steeple, with the specific proportions that suggest it was built to serve a congregation that was once larger and more fervent than the current one. American small towns are full of these buildings, many of them built in the 19th century, when religious participation was higher and congregations had more resources to devote to architecture. The Lovejoy Church looks like it was built for a different era, which is apt for a religious institution that is itself slightly out of step with the era in which it currently operates. The show's relationship with organized religion, as represented through the church building and through Lovejoy's congregation, is one of gentle but consistent satire. The church is not mocked as an institution. The faith of its congregants, such as it is treated with something closer to sympathy than contempt. But the gap between the aspirations represented by the church's architecture, the white steeple pointing toward heaven, the clean lines of a building that declares its own seriousness about what happens inside it, and the actual spiritual state of the people who enter it every Sunday, is one of the show's quietest running observations. The nuclear power plant, considered purely as a piece of architecture, is something that the show has always rendered with a specific visual vocabulary that separates it from every other location in Springfield. The 4 cooling towers, visible from almost everywhere in town, serve as a constant background presence in outdoor scenes throughout the series. They are Springfield's skyline. In a town that is otherwise low to the ground, 2-story homes, single-story commercial buildings, a school and a church and a town hall that are large but not monumental. The cooling towers represent the only genuine vertical element. They dominate. They cannot be ignored, even when they're in the background of a scene that has nothing to do with the plant or with Burns. This is deliberate visual storytelling of the most elegant kind. The show doesn't need to explicitly tell you that Burns's facility dominates Springfield. It shows you, in every outdoor scene, a skyline that is defined by the plant's cooling towers. The economic and social dominance of the facility is literalized in its architectural dominance of the town's visual field. It is always visible. It is always there. It cannot be looked away from even when the characters are looking away from it. The town hall, the police station, the courthouse, the hospital, these public buildings, all share a visual vocabulary that suggests mid-20th century civic ambition, underfunded into mid-20th century civic adequacy. They look like buildings from an era when people believed that public institutions were important enough to build with some degree of care, but when the resources to build them with genuine grandeur weren't available. They are functional, they are institutional. They are, in their specific way, honest. These buildings do not pretend to be more than they are, which places them in interesting contrast with Burns's facility, which is a place of enormous hidden danger presenting itself as an ordinary piece of industrial infrastructure. The totality of Springfield's architecture, the composite of regional American types and specific building amounts to a portrait of the American built environment that is both idealized and accurate. Springfield looks like a place where people live. It looks like the kinds of places Americans live. It contains the architectural vocabulary of American domestic life, American civic life, American commercial life, and American industrial life in a single fictional town that is everywhere and nowhere at once. And in that totality, in that composite portrait of American spaces, the show has been making an argument about American life for 36 years. The argument that the places we build and inhabit reflect the values and priorities and compromises of the society that builds them. The argument that architecture is not neutral, that a nuclear plant's cooling towers dominating a town's skyline means something, that a school that looks like a factory means something, that a church built for a congregation that was larger and more faithful than the current one means something. The argument that you can read a community's history and present condition in the buildings that stand in it and the spaces between them. Springfield's architecture is not just a setting, it is a text. And the show has been writing in it, adding to it, refining it, for longer than most buildings last. Section 6: Character Design and What They're Really Saying. Animation is a language of reduction. Where live-action storytelling works through the infinite complexity of real human faces and bodies and movements, animation works by identifying the essential characteristics of a person or a type or an emotion and simplifying everything else away. The result, when it's done well, is not a poorer version of human representation, but a clearer one, a version that communicates character more directly and more efficiently than naturalistic representation could. The Simpsons, from its earliest episodes as crude animated segments on The Tracy Ullman Show, through its eventual refinement into one of the most consistently recognizable visual styles in entertainment history, developed a system of character design that is in many ways a masterclass in how animation can use visual information to tell you who someone is before they've said a word. Let's start with Homer, because Homer's design is the most thoroughly analyzed and the most deliberately constructed of the main characters, and because understanding what the design choices are saying about him illuminates the design logic of the entire show. Homer Simpson is built around excess. Not just the obvious physical excess of his body, the rounded stomach, the heavy frame, the specific physical presence of a man who eats more than he should and moves less than he should, but excess in every visual dimension. His features are pushed to extremes. The overbite is an overbite that no dental x-ray would be surprised by, but that, in the specific proportions of Homer's face, becomes a defining feature, a piece of anatomy that gives his face a specific shape, rounded, slightly pushed forward, slightly simian in a way that is obviously a caricature, but that is anchored in real human anatomy. His eyes are large. The show's entire visual style involves enlarged eyes. It's one of the primary ways the animation establishes character and conveys emotion, but Homer's eyes have a specific quality of slightly unfocused. Attention. They are always open, always watching, but not always comprehending. There is a particular expression Homer carries in resting state, a slight slackness in the area around the eyes, a quality of presence without particular engagement that the animators developed and refined across the show's early seasons, and that became one of the most recognizable elements of his visual identity. His head shape is another piece of the design that rewards attention. The specific curve of Homer's skull, the way the back of his head rounds outward in a way that doesn't quite match standard human cranial geometry, the way his head seems slightly larger than it should be for his neck, which is itself slightly shorter than it should be for his body, creates a visual impression that is both comic and, in a strange way, touching. Homer's head looks like a head that has experienced things. It looks, in the specific visual language the show developed for it, like a head that contains a person who is trying very hard to understand a world that is not especially designed for people who find understanding difficult. The animators have spoken in various interviews about how Homer's design evolved to give maximum expressiveness to an initially crude sketch. The early Homer, the Homer of the Tracy Ullman shorts and the first season of the full series, is rougher, less refined, with proportions that are somewhat different from the Homer who became iconic. The nose is different. The body shape is slightly different. The way the face moves is different. Over the first 3 to 4 seasons, the show's animation refined Homer's design towards something that could carry a much wider range of emotional expression than the original crude sketch allowed for. By season 4 or 5, Homer's face was capable of conveying emotional nuance that no one who saw the original Tracy Ullman sketches would have thought possible. This is part of what makes the show's early visual history so interesting to trace. The character designs are not finished products from the beginning. They are propositions, initial sketches of people who then develop through the practice of animating them week after week. The Homer of Season 10 is a more refined, more expressive, more fully realized piece of visual characterization than the Homer of Season 1, and the difference is not just technical improvement, it's the accumulated knowledge of a creative team that has spent years learning how this particular face communicates. Marge's design is almost the mirror image of Homer's in terms of what it communicates and how it communicates it. Where Homer is built around excess physical, emotional, behavioral, excess Marge is built around containment. Her body is slender, compressed into a silhouette that conveys control and restraint. Her face, with its high cheekbones and large, patient eyes, projects a quality of sustained attention and held emotion. She is always watching. She is always registering. But the registration stays inside, processed and integrated, and expressed through the quality of her attention rather than through any kind of outward excess. And then there is the hair. Marge's hair is the most remarkable piece of character design in the show's history, and possibly one of the most remarkable pieces of character design in the history of animation. It is blue, it is tall, it maintains its specific shape, that vertiginous tower of blue hair rising from her head in a way that defies gravity without making any apology for defying gravity across every episode, every scene, every circumstance that Marge has ever found herself in. The hair has been wet. It has been blown by wind. It has been covered by hats and helmets and disguises. It always returns to itself. The hair is permanent. The design history of the blue hair traces back to a reference Groening drew on an early sketch, a joke about Marge's hair being stacked up in a way that suggested something impractical and slightly excessive. But over time, the hair became more than a character design quirk. It became a symbol of Marge's particular kind of constancy. In a show where everything changes from episode to episode and nothing is permanent, the hair is permanent. It is always exactly itself. It is the visual anchor that marks where Marge is in any given frame, and it communicates, without words, something about Marge's relationship to her own identity. She maintains her form. She is contained and consistent even in the most chaotic circumstances. There is a recurring pattern in the show's visual storytelling where Marge's hair functions as an emotional barometer that's more reliable than anything she says. When the hair is perfectly maintained, when it stands exactly at its proper height and holds its exact curve, Marge is in control, or is managing to project control, even when she isn't experiencing it. When the hair is disturbed, when it's been knocked sideways or deflated or made to behave in ways other than its natural form, something has happened to Marge's composure. The visual character design is doing emotional storytelling that supplements or sometimes replaces what the dialogue is saying. Bart's design communicates something entirely different. Where Homer is built around excess and Marge around containment, Bart is built around energy in its most kinetic form. His spiky hair, which, like the blue tower of Marge's hair, maintains itself without explanation across every episode and every circumstance, has a forward-pushing quality, like something in perpetual motion. His eyes are more actively engaged than Homer's, more alert, more responsive, more present in the moment. His body is compact and expressive, a design built for physical comedy, for the specific physical vocabulary of a kid who never stops moving. The orange t-shirt and blue shorts he wears in every episode are among the most iconic pieces of animated character costuming in history, and they communicate something specific. Bart exists outside the idea of special occasions. He is always casual. He is always in motion. He is never dressed for something important because everything in his life is happening at the level of immediate experience rather than formal significance. Homer has his white shirt and work pants that suggest a job, a role, a place in an economic structure. Bart just has the t-shirt and the shorts and the skateboard and the immediate world around him. Lisa's design is the most internally complex of the four main family members and the one that most clearly signals, purely through visual character design, the emotional register she occupies in the show. She is built smaller and more contained than Bart, even accounting for the age difference. There is something in Lisa's physical presence in the frame that feels slightly drawn inward, slightly self-contained, slightly like a person who has learned to take up less space than she might naturally occupy. Her red dress, always the same red dress, always exactly that specific shade of red, creates a visual impression of formality and precision within the family context. She is the one who is always dressed. Her eyes are the most expressive in the family. This is partly a function of the animation style for her character. Her face was designed from the beginning to carry more naturalistic emotional range than either Homer or Bart, because her character required it. Lisa is the family's emotional intelligence. She is the one who understands what is happening and why it matters and what it costs. That understanding is visible in her eyes in ways that the show's animators have leveraged consistently across the series. Maggie's design is the most efficiently communicative of any character in the show, which is appropriate given that she communicates almost entirely non-verbally. The pacifier is the dominant visual element, a piece of character design that functions as a kind of constant mute button, as a marker of pre-verbal status, but that the show has also used as an expressive tool in its own right. Maggie's pacifier moves in ways that correspond to her internal states, communicating emotion and intention through something that is itself a signifier of the inability to communicate through language. Her enormous eyes, relative to her face size, follow the general logic of the show's baby character design, but in Maggie's case, they carry a quality that becomes, the more you watch the show closely, slightly unsettling in its intelligence. Baby eyes in animation are typically designed to be maximally cute, maximally innocent, large and liquid, and uncomprehending. Maggie's eyes are large and liquid, but not uncomprehending. They register, they process, they respond. The animators, whether deliberately or through the accumulated character logic of the show's writing, gave Maggie eyes that are too aware for someone who maintains the pretense of being a standard-issue television baby. The secondary characters of Springfield are each miniature masterclasses in the specific efficiency of animated character design. Burns is perhaps the most extreme example. His design takes the visual language of predatory capital and elderly physical frailty and compresses both into a single silhouette that is immediately, indelibly recognizable. The hunched posture, the fingers perpetually pressed together in that particular gesture, the head that is too large for the body it sits on, the specific way his hands move, always deliberate, always slightly theatrical. Burns's design is a caricature of a specific type of power, the power that has outlasted its physical container, but that has not diminished in its reach or its ambition. Ned Flanders's design communicates safety and wholeness in ways that are, when you consider them carefully, slightly too perfect. He is athletic where Homer is heavy. His clothing is always neat where Homer's is always slightly disheveled. His features are regular and pleasant and symmetrical in ways that suggest a person who has been, at some level, carefully maintained. The design of Ned is the design of someone who is trying, and in this context, trying carries both its ordinary meaning and its emotional meaning. Ned is trying, in every visual detail of his appearance, to be the thing he has decided he should be. Chief Wiggum's design does something very specific with the visual language of authority. It places the signifiers of official power, the blue uniform, the badge, the general posture of a person who believes he is important, on a body and a face that undercut those signifiers completely. He is round where authority figures are supposed to be imposing. His eyes are small and slightly unfocused in ways that suggest someone who is processing incoming information less efficiently than his role requires. He is designed to look like a person wearing the costume of authority rather than a person who embodies it. Across all of these designs, across the main characters and the secondary characters, and the dozens of recurring Springfield residents who populate the show's background world, there is a consistent visual logic at work. Character design in The Simpsons is always communicative and always efficient. The design tells you who someone is before they speak. It tells you what their relationship to their world is, what their relationship to power is, what their emotional register tends to be. And over 36 years of episodes, those initial design communications have been refined and extended and complicated by the weight of story, by everything these visual characters have experienced and done and said and failed at and tried again. The designs are not fixed representations of fixed people. They are living documents, constantly being adjusted by the context of what the show is asking them to carry. Homer's face at the end of the episode where he learns the truth about his mother is different subtly, but meaningfully different from Homer's face at the beginning of that episode. Not because the animators redrew him, but because the story has added weight to the design that the design now carries. Character design, at its best, is the relationship between the original visual intention and everything that has been layered on top of it by the act of storytelling. The Simpsons has been layering things on top of those original visual intentions for 36 years, and the designs have held. They are flexible enough to carry everything the show has put into them without losing their essential character. Homer is still Homer. Marge is still Marge. The yellow family on the orange couch in the house on Evergreen Terrace is still immediately, completely recognizable as themselves. That is what great character design achieves. Not just recognition, but recognition that carries depth. Not just the identification of who someone is, but the feeling that you know them. Section 7: The Writer's Room Secrets. Every inside joke explained. The Simpsons writing room is one of the most analyzed creative environments in American television history, and for good reason. The people who wrote the show's classic seasons produced work that has been studied in university courses, dissected in academic papers, quoted endlessly, referenced across virtually every other piece of comedy that came after it. The influence is so total that it's almost impossible to fully trace. Modern animated comedy and a great deal of modern live-action comedy exists in a world that The Simpsons helped create. The writing staff that assembled during the show's late first season and solidified through seasons 2 through 8 was extraordinary in its density of talent. Al Jean, Mike Rice, Conan O'Brien, Greg Daniels, Bill Oakley, Josh Weinstein, John Swartzwelder, George Meyer, Jeff Martin, David Stern, Frank Mula. These names represent a concentration of writing talent that is almost without parallel in the history of American television comedy. Many of them had Harvard backgrounds, specifically from the Harvard Lampoon, which has been a pipeline for comedy writers for decades. Many of them went on to create or shape other significant works. But during the seasons, they were all in the same room. Something happened that doesn't always happen when talented people work together. They made each other better than they would have been individually. The inside jokes and self-referential elements of the show's classic era are not incidental or merely clever. They are the surface manifestation of a writing culture that was deeply, perhaps obsessively, self-aware, aware of the show's own history, aware of the conventions it was working within and against, aware of the audience it was developing, and the specific kind of intelligence that audience was bringing to the viewing experience. John Swartzwelder is perhaps the most mythologized figure in the show's writing history, and his mythology is interesting precisely because it's built on absence. Swartzwelder wrote more produced scripts for The Simpsons than any other single writer, 59. By most accounts, though the exact number varies depending on how you count collaborative credits. He was known within the show's creative community as a writer of extraordinary productivity and even more extraordinary eccentricity. He worked in isolation. He submitted scripts from a remote location. He declined interviews and virtually all public acknowledgement. He has remained, for decades, almost completely inaccessible to the outside world. And yet his influence on the show's comic sensibility is total. The Swartzwelder script is a recognizable thing dense with jokes. Jokes that land on top of previous jokes before the previous jokes have fully finished landing. Jokes that operate simultaneously on the level of immediate comic stimulus and on the level of something more structurally complex. Something that reveals additional meaning when you think about it after the laugh has subsided. His scripts have a pace and a density that other writers on the show have described as both inspiring and slightly daunting. Inspiring because the jokes are very good, daunting because they are so good and so many of them. The inside jokes specific to the writing staff are numerous and varied, and often operate on a level that only rewards viewers who are deeply familiar with the show's own history. There are references, scattered throughout the classic seasons, to real experiences the writers had while making the show, to real arguments they had about specific creative choices, to specific moments in the production process that found their way, transmuted and satirized and made fictional, into scenes and lines and background details. One of the most sustained patterns in the show's writing is what might be called the recursive reference, the moment where the show references itself referencing something else, where the joke operates not just on the level of the reference, but on the level of the show's awareness that it is making a reference. The Simpsons developed this technique early and has deployed it with increasing sophistication across the show's run. By the middle seasons, the show was writing jokes about the show writing jokes, and the audience sufficiently familiar with the show's history and sufficiently aware of the show's meta-awareness of its own history could follow multiple levels of the joke simultaneously. This recursive quality extends to the show's treatment of television itself. The Simpsons is a show about a family that watches a lot of television, which means it's a show about television that is itself television, and the jokes about television that appear throughout the series are sometimes jokes about television in general and sometimes jokes about the kind of television the show itself is. This creates a hall of mirrors quality in certain episodes that is one of the show's most distinctively postmodern characteristics. Though postmodern is a word that gets applied to the show so frequently and so loosely that it has lost some useful precision. What's more specific and more interesting is the way the show uses television as a subject to reflect on its own existence. The fictional television shows that exist within Springfield's world, Itchy and Scratchy, Krusty the Clown, The Flintstones, adjacent animation that the family watches on their television set are not just parodies of television types. They are, in different ways, mirrors in which the show examines itself. Itchy and Scratchy in particular functions as a comment on animated violence and audience desensitization that is also implicitly a comment on the cartoon violence in The Simpsons itself. The show is critiquing something it participates in, using the distance of fictional within fictional to say something about the real-world thing it's pointing at. The writer's room culture also produced a specific relationship to continuity and to the show's own history that has become one of its most discussed characteristics. The show's official position on continuity, the floating timeline, the episodic reset, the way major events don't carry forward into subsequent episodes, is not something the writers were unaware of or indifferent to. It was a deliberate choice, maintained across decades, that reflects a specific philosophy about what kind of story The Simpsons is. The writers made a decision, early and consistently maintained, that The Simpsons would prioritize the comedy of individual episodes over the drama of a cumulative narrative. They chose episodic satisfaction over serialized development. They chose jokes that work in the moment over consequences that pay off over time. This is a choice with real costs. It means you can't tell certain kinds of stories, can't develop characters in certain ways, can't allow the world to change in response to what happens in it. But it also produces a specific kind of freedom that serialized storytelling can't offer. Every episode can be anything. Every episode can reset to zero and start fresh. The creative possibilities within the specific world the show has built are essentially unlimited. The writing staff also developed a specific vocabulary of comic techniques that became the show's signature, not just the individual jokes, but the structures in which those jokes were delivered. The cutaway gag, used judiciously in the classic seasons and with increasing frequency in later ones, originated in The Simpsons and was later developed much more extensively by other shows. The subversion of the setup, where the show establishes what appears to be a standard joke setup and then delivers something unexpected at the punchline, became one of the show's most reliable comic tools. The use of extended sequences of increasingly escalating absurdity, where each escalation is funnier than the last because it's built on the accumulated comedy of everything before it, is a technique that the writers at their best deployed with extraordinary precision. George Meyer is the name that comes up most often when people who worked on the show discuss who they considered the purest and most singular comedic talent in the room. Meyer's specific contribution to the show's voice, the dark-edged, slightly absurdist quality that gives the show's comedy its undertow of genuine unease, is difficult to isolate in specific moments because it's distributed throughout the writing culture he was part of. But writers who have discussed the room uniformly describe a sensibility that pushed toward finding the comic in places that felt slightly uncomfortable, in moments where the joke and something more difficult occupied the same space. This is the quality that makes the show's best moments different from ordinary television comedy. The moments where you laugh and feel something else simultaneously. The moments where the joke lands and something underneath it is saying something that isn't quite a joke. The writing room at its best was always looking for those moments, the place where comedy and truth were pointing at the same thing from different angles. The specific rhythms of the scripts, the way the dialogue is paced, the way jokes are timed, the specific cadences of the different characters' speaking voices are another form of inside knowledge that rewards attention. Each of the main characters has a distinct verbal rhythm that was developed through the early seasons and maintained with impressive consistency. Homer's speech pattern has a specific quality of starting a thought with confidence and then arriving at a destination that is surprising even to Homer. Marge speaks with a kind of careful deliberateness that suggests someone who has thought about what she's going to say, but who sometimes arrives at the end of the sentence uncertain whether what she said was what she meant. Bart speaks quickly and in bursts, his verbal energy matching his physical energy. Lisa speaks with the slightly elevated vocabulary and formal sentence structure of someone who reads more than she watches television, and who has a complicated relationship with having to communicate with people at a lower register than her natural one. These rhythms are the accumulated product of writers learning to think in the characters' voices, and of voice actors developing the specific qualities of those voices across hundreds of hours of recording. The scripts give you the words. The recording sessions give you the music. And after enough time, after enough episodes and enough sessions, the two things fuse into something that you experience not as a script being performed, but as a person speaking. The writer's room secrets extend to the research that went into individual episodes, the specific fields of knowledge that different writers brought to the room, the way particular episodes reflect particular writers' interests or expertise or experience. The episodes about nuclear safety reflect genuine research into the specific ways nuclear facilities can fail. The episodes about jazz reflect a real engagement with jazz music and jazz history. The episodes about baseball, about space exploration, about brain science. Each of these drew on real knowledge that found its way into the comedy in ways that made the comedy smarter and the satire sharper than it would have been without it. This is one of the things that distinguishes the show's classic era most clearly from what came before it in American animation. It was made by people who knew things, who cared about getting things right even when getting things right was in service of a joke, who believed that comedy was more satisfying when it was informed. A joke about nuclear physics is funnier if the nuclear physics is actually correct. A satire of small-town civic politics is sharper if the writers understand how small-town civic politics actually works. The research shows, even when it's invisible, because it gives the comedy a quality of specificity that vague topical reference doesn't produce. The Simpsons writing room, at its peak, was a place where very smart people who had done their homework gathered every day to find the funniest and truest thing to say about whatever they were looking at. That combination, intelligence, research, and the specific social pressure of a comedy writing room, where the bar is set by everyone around you, produced work that has outlasted almost everything else from its era, and that continues to reward engagement in ways that writing of lesser quality does not. Section 8. The recurring symbols. Nobody talks about. Every long-running work of narrative art develops its own symbolic vocabulary, a set of recurring visual or textual elements that accumulate meaning across the work's history, that begin as specific images or objects or words and gradually take on a resonance that exceeds their literal function. Shakespeare's plays have their roses and storms and disguises. Dickens' novels have their fog and their grotesque minor characters and their coincidences of proximity. The Simpsons, running for longer than either of those bodies of work took to produce, has developed a symbolic vocabulary that is dense and specific and largely unacknowledged, a set of recurring elements that the show has been using to say things about itself and its characters and its world since the very beginning. Let's begin with donuts. Homer's relationship with donuts is one of the most visible and most discussed aspects of his characterization, and it's easy to absorb this relationship as simply a character quirk. Homer likes donuts the way Garfield likes lasagna, a food preference inflated to comic extreme. But the donut in The Simpsons is doing more work than that. It has, over 36 seasons, been used in enough specific and varied ways that it functions as a genuine symbol within the show's logic. The donut is Homer's relationship with pleasure in its purest, most undiluted form. It is the thing he wants for its own sake, without complication or justification. Every other source of pleasure in Homer's life, his family, his job, which provides pleasure primarily through its absence, his friendships, his occasional adventures comes with complications. The family comes with responsibility. The friendships come with obligation. The pleasure of a donut is clean. It is immediate. It requires nothing in return and produces nothing beyond itself. It is the experience of pleasure as pleasure. In the show's symbolic vocabulary, Homer reaching for a donut is Homer reaching for the uncomplicated version of happiness. The episodes where Homer sacrifices something important for a donut, where he passes up a significant opportunity or makes a consequential choice in favor of immediate donut-related gratification are, at the symbolic level, episodes about the temptation of simple pleasure over complicated fulfillment. Homer always knows that the complicated version is better. He frequently chooses the donut anyway. The specific visual of Homer salivating over a donut mouth open, a quality of ecstatic anticipation on his face, a sound effect that became immediately iconic is so closely associated with the character that it has escaped the show's specific context and entered general cultural use. People who have never watched The Simpsons use the word Homer drooling as a shorthand for a particular kind of intense, undiscriminating appetite. The symbol has propagated beyond its source. But within the show's specific logic, the donut also serves as a kind of recurring joke about Homer's job. Homer works at a nuclear facility. His primary contribution to the prevention of nuclear catastrophe at that facility is occupying the role of safety inspector, a role he performs by sitting at a console and occasionally eating donuts while warning lights flash unnoticed behind him. The donut is in the reactor. The donut is on the console. The donut is being used as a paperweight for sensitive safety documentation. The specific juxtaposition of the most trivial pleasure Homer can imagine against the most consequential piece of infrastructure he is supposedly responsible for is the basis of one of the show's longest-running and most perfectly sustained jokes. The saxophone is Lisa's equivalent symbol, and where Homer's donut is about uncomplicated appetite, Lisa's saxophone is about something considerably more complex. The saxophone is the language she speaks when English fails her. It is the medium through which she expresses things she cannot say directly. It is the tool she uses to access parts of herself, the emotional intelligence, the artistic sensibility, the capacity for genuine feeling that the intellectual framework of her regular communication can't always fully carry that don't have another outlet in her family or her school or her town. Every time Lisa plays her saxophone in a meaningful way as opposed to the brief solo in the opening credits, which is routine, the show is saying something about what's happening inside her, that the dialogue hasn't said. The quality of the playing, the specific piece she's playing, the context in which she's playing it, these are all elements of the show's symbolic language. Lisa alone with her saxophone is Lisa alone with herself, which is both the thing she needs and the thing that breaks her heart. There is a pattern in the show's treatment of Lisa's saxophone across the series that traces her emotional arc more honestly than any summary of her storylines could do. In moments of Lisa's deepest isolation, the saxophone music has a specific quality of yearning that the show has deployed with great sensitivity. In moments of Lisa's genuine connection with something or someone outside herself, moments of artistic breakthrough, moments of real, mutual understanding with another person, the saxophone sounds different. Not technically different, not in a way that requires musical analysis to identify. Emotionally different, the note it strikes is different. The color blue appears repeatedly across the show in contexts that, accumulated over time, suggests something more than coincidence. Marge's hair is blue. The Simpsons family car is sometimes blue. The sky over Springfield is blue in that specific shade of flat cartoon blue that the show uses as its default sky color. The color appears in moments of emotional significance with a frequency that goes beyond random visual choice. In moments of melancholy, in moments where a character is experiencing something that the show is treating with genuine emotional seriousness, blue tends to dominate the visual field. Not exclusively. Not in a way that makes the pattern mechanical, but with enough consistency that once you start noticing it, you see it regularly. The show is using color not just as palette, but as signal. Blue is the color of feeling something honestly. The Springfield Gorge is a specific recurring location that has accumulated meaning in ways that are both comic and, in the broader context of the show's symbolic vocabulary, something more. The gorge is where Bart goes to attempt his skateboard jump in the episode Bart the Daredevil, an episode from Season 2 that contains one of the show's most beautifully constructed sequences, in which Homer, having talked Bart out of attempting the dangerous jump, falls into the gorge himself, bouncing and crashing and suffering extensive injuries in what becomes a prolonged piece of physical comedy that is also Underneath the comedy, a genuinely affecting piece of character work about a father trying to protect his son. The Gorge has appeared in multiple episodes across the show's history as a site of risk and consequences, a place where characters go when they are about to do something dangerous or foolish or both. It functions, in the show's geography, as a kind of liminal space, a place at the edge of the safe world where the normal rules of consequence are suspended just long enough for something significant to happen. The prank calls to Moe's Tavern are a recurring element that functions symbolically in a way that's easy to miss because the joke is so immediate and so consistent that the symbol inside it doesn't announce itself. Bart calling Moe and asking for a patron with an embarrassing made-up name is, on its surface, a simple prank call gag. But in the show's symbolic vocabulary, it's also a ritual of connection between Bart and Moe that is stranger and more intimate than either of them would acknowledge. Moe answers every single time. He is always outraged. He always falls for it. And Bart always hangs up and the connection is severed. But the call was made. They were in communication, briefly, across the specific vulnerability that the prank call exploits Moe's need to believe that someone is calling for him specifically, for something important, rather than just to embarrass him in front of his customers. The ritual of the prank call is the symbol of Springfield's specific kind of community, connected and isolated simultaneously, reaching toward each other and pulling away in the same gesture, finding in humor the only safe way to acknowledge that you exist in relation to other people. The beer, Duff beer specifically, is to Springfield what the donut is to Homer, but distributed across the male population of the town. Duff is the specific beverage of Homer's social world, of Moe's Tavern, of the working-class culture that the show depicts with affection and without condescension. It is deliberately undistinguished as a product. The joke about Duff, running from the earliest seasons, is that it's exactly the beer it appears to be. No craft, no heritage, no pretension. Just beer in the can, consumed in quantity. The symbol of Duff is the symbol of an undemanding relationship with pleasure, which is Homer's register and Springfield's register pleasure that makes no claim to be more than it is. Grandpa Simpson's rambling stories, the extended, seemingly pointless anecdotes that he launches into in various episodes, stories that begin with specific events and locations, and then wander through increasingly remote historical and biographical territory before arriving somewhere unexpected, are a recurring, symbolic element that does specific work about memory, aging, and the relationship between past and present. In the show's symbolic vocabulary, Grandpa's stories are the repository of Springfield's actual history, the messy, embarrassing, complicated, inconsistently maintained history that the town's official narrative doesn't acknowledge. Grandpa was there for things. He remembers them imperfectly and relates them in ways that mix genuine fact with genuine confusion. But the stories contain something true about what happened, something that wouldn't be preserved anywhere else. He is the show's oldest reliable witness, which means he is simultaneously the most knowledgeable and the least credible source in the show's universe. The power plant's cooling towers, as a skyline element recurring in establishing shots throughout the series, function as a symbol that the show itself never directly addresses. They are just there, always present in the background of outdoor Springfield scenes, always visible from whatever angle you're viewing the town from. Their constant background presence is the show's most sustained visual symbol, an image that appears in more frames than any other element of the show's background world, and that communicates, in each appearance, the same quiet, insistent fact about where this world exists and what dominates it. The cooling towers are a symbol of what the town can't escape. They are the visible fact of dependency, the sign that power, in every sense of the word, comes from a specific source, and that source has not been chosen freely by the people who live under its influence. The towers are always there. The characters almost never look at them. The symbol is most powerful in its consistency and in its invisibility to the people who live within its range. Every object and location that recurs in The Simpsons across seasons and episodes is accumulating meaning. The show has been running long enough that the accumulation is substantial. The donut and the saxophone and the gorge, and the prank calls and the Duff cans and the cooling towers and Marge's hair, each of these is a thread in a textile that took 36 years to weave, and the pattern it makes is the pattern of the show's deepest understanding of itself and its world. Section 9. The emotional patterns running through every season. The Simpsons is, at its core, a show about the persistence of love in the face of everything that love has to endure. This is not the first thing people say about it. People say it's a show about American family dysfunction, about the satire of suburban life, about the specific comedic possibilities of a nuclear family in a nuclear-powered town. All of these things are true. But underneath all of the satire and the comedy and the social commentary, the show returns, again and again, with genuine consistency across 3.5 decades, to a small number of emotional territories that it cares about more deeply than it cares about anything else. Family, belonging, the specific ache of not being understood by the people around you, the specific relief of being understood anyway, even imperfectly, the way children reveal parents to themselves, the way parents shape children in ways that persist long after the shaping is consciously happening, the way a home can be the source of both greatest comfort and greatest conflict simultaneously. These are the emotional patterns that run through the show's history, with a consistency that the show's comic ambitions and its structural episodic resets cannot fully cover. Episodes that are ostensibly about something else, about Homer's newest job or Bart's newest scheme or Lisa's newest cause, keep returning to these emotional cores because the writers understand that this is what the show is really about, even when it's pretending to be about other things. The Homer and Bart relationship is perhaps the most emotionally complex in the show's history, and it operates at a level of genuine ambivalence that is quite unusual for a family sitcom. Homer loves Bart. This is unambiguous and has been demonstrated across hundreds of episodes in ways that range from the comic to the genuinely moving. But Homer's relationship with Bart is also defined by frustration, by disappointment, by the specific experience of having a child who is too much like you in the ways that embarrass you and too different from you in the ways you were hoping for. Homer sees himself in Bart constantly, the impulsive behavior, the disregard for consequences, the pleasure-seeking that overrides better judgment, and he responds to that reflection with a complex mixture of recognition and resistance. Bart's experience of Homer is similarly complex. He knows his father loves him. He also knows that his father is frequently baffled by him, that the relationship between them involves constant disappointment going in both directions. But he also, in the episodes where the show reaches for genuine emotional truth about this specific relationship, demonstrates a need for Homer's approval and acceptance that is as deep as any other emotional need the character displays. The pranks, the rebellion, the constant testing of limits, these are partly the natural expression of Bart's character, but they are also partly attempts to get Homer to look at him with genuine attention, to see him, rather than just to react to him. The episodes that directly address this relationship that put Homer and Bart alone together, in some circumstance where the normal surface of their dynamic is stripped away, are among the show's most emotionally powerful. Radio Bart, where Bart uses a radio microphone to pretend to be a child trapped in a well, only to actually fall into the well and be rescued by a town mobilized by Homer's belief that the child inside was his son. Bart Sells His Soul, which explores what Bart understands about his own emotional and spiritual life, through the device of treating the soul as a tradable commodity. Episodes where father and son are forced into unusual proximity and the usual buffers of family life. Marge's mediation, Lisa's commentary, the television, the routine are unavailable. In these stripped-down episodes, what the show reveals is genuine, not manufactured for sentiment, but discovered through the logic of character. Homer and Bart are more similar than either of them is comfortable admitting. They both want more than they have. They both express that want in ways that don't quite work. They both love their family with an intensity that their behavior frequently fails to communicate. The emotional pattern that runs through their relationship is the pattern of people who love each other imperfectly and know it and keep trying anyway. The Marge and Homer relationship is built on a different emotional foundation, but one that is equally carefully developed across the show's history. Their relationship is the central emotional fact of the show, the thing that everything else circles around, the commitment that holds the family together when Homer's latest disaster has brought it to what appears to be its final breaking point. And the pattern of that relationship, across hundreds of episodes, is the pattern of a love that is tested by the ordinary difficulties of sharing a life with another person. The Simpsons is unusual among family sitcoms in the honesty with which it depicts the challenge of a long marriage. Homer and Marge have genuine conflicts, not just comedic misunderstandings. Marge experiences genuine frustration with Homer's behavior, not just mild exasperation. The show has, in various episodes, depicted them at real crossroads moments where the marriage could credibly end, where the distance between what Marge wants and what Homer is able to provide is depicted without flinching. And it has shown, in the resolution of those moments, not that love is easy or that commitment solves problems automatically, but that the choice to return to each other is a choice that gets remade, and that its meaningfulness comes from being remade rather than from being made once and assumed permanent. Secrets of a Successful Marriage, The Last Temptation of Homer, Fear of Flying, scenes from the class struggle in Springfield, episodes across the show's history that have approached the Marge and Homer marriage from different angles and found, in each approach, something true about the specific difficulty and the specific beauty of two people deciding to remain in the same life together. The Lisa isolation pattern is one of the most consistent emotional through lines in the show's history, and it is the one that carries the most genuine pathos because it is the one the show is most honest about not being able to resolve. Lisa is the most intelligent person in her family. She is probably the most intelligent person in her school and quite possibly the most intelligent person in her town. And her intelligence is, as the show depicts it, repeatedly and without sentimentality, a source of profound loneliness. It places her outside the easy comfort of belonging that requires no special effort. It makes her relationships complicated and conditional in ways that other people's relationships don't need to be. It means she sees things that others don't, understands things that others aren't ready to understand, cares about things that others find tedious or threatening or simply not relevant to their lives. The emotional pattern in Lisa's storylines is the pattern of someone who keeps reaching toward connection and finding the gap between herself and others wider than she hoped. She tries, in episode after episode, to find another person, a teacher, a peer, a family member in a moment of unusual clarity, who can meet her where she actually is. She occasionally succeeds. She more often doesn't. And the show never pretends that this will change, that Lisa will find her community and be permanently sustained by it. The world of Springfield is not designed to sustain Lisa, and Lisa, at 8 years old, is already beginning to understand that. The episodes that take this seriously, that sit with Lisa's loneliness, without immediately resolving it into comedy or into a lesson learned, are among the most affecting the show has produced. Moaning Lisa, the second episode of the first season, established this pattern immediately and established it with remarkable delicacy for a comedy show in its infancy. Lisa is simply sad. She doesn't know why. The sadness doesn't have a cause that can be fixed. And when Marge, after initially trying to talk Lisa out of her sadness, reverses course and tells her daughter that it's okay to feel what she feels, the show achieves something in its 9th episode that many shows never achieve: an emotional truth told simply and without deflection. The grandfather-grandchild relationship, specifically the Abe Simpson-Bart connection, carries a different emotional pattern. Abe is a man who exists within the show's emotional economy, in the condition of having been forgotten. He was once the center of something, a family, a set of relationships, a life that had weight and consequence, and is now peripheral to the lives of people who are busy being the centers of their own stories. His relationship with Bart is one of the few contexts in which he is genuinely attended to, genuinely met where he is rather than accommodated out of obligation. The episodes that center on Abe's past, his relationship with Mona, his war experiences, his earlier life in Springfield are emotionally complicated in ways that the show handles with surprising care. Abe made choices. Some of those choices were small and understandable, and produced consequences that grew larger than anyone anticipated. Some of them were straightforwardly wrong. The show holds both of these truths without resolving them against each other. Abe is a flawed person who is also, underneath the flaws, a person who genuinely loved the people he damaged. The emotional pattern of his storylines is the pattern of living with the consequences of choices you can't undo, of maintaining some relationship with a self you can no longer fully recognize. The pattern of grief, the specific way The Simpsons handles death and loss, is worth extended attention because it represents one of the show's most remarkable emotional achievements. The show has killed characters. Real deaths, not Treehouse of Horror non-canonical deaths, but deaths that happened within the show's main universe and that the show then had to live with. Maud Flanders' death. Mona Simpson's death. The death of minor characters who had accumulated enough screen time to feel like presences in Springfield's world. And the show has handled these deaths with a consistency and a genuine emotional generosity that is quite unexpected from a comedy series. The episodes that deal directly with death tend to be the episodes where the comedy pulls back and something quieter and truer takes the foreground. The grief is not resolved quickly. It is not covered with a joke that makes it manageable. It is allowed to exist in the specific colors it takes in this specific show with these specific characters for as long as the episode gives it room. Maude Flanders's death created an emotional obligation for the show that it honored over multiple subsequent episodes, and across many seasons the obligation to show Ned's continued grief, his continued love for a woman who was no longer there, his continued attempt to be a father to his children without the partner who had been central to his parenting. The show did not forget Maude. It carried her absence forward in ways that gave Ned's character a depth it might not otherwise have achieved. The emotional through line of the show's entire run is the through line of a family that keeps finding its way back to itself. Every season ends more or less where it began. Every catastrophe resolves. Every estrangement heals or at least scabs over. Every episode returns to the couch, to the house on Evergreen Terrace, to the five of them together in the space they share. The reset is often read as a structural convenience, as the episodic storytelling necessity that prevents the show from becoming a serialized drama. And it is that, but it's also the show's emotional thesis. The family persists. Whatever happens, the family persists. The persistence is the point. Section 10, the guest star patterns and what they reveal. There are guest stars and there are Simpsons guest stars, and the distance between these categories is considerable. Appearing on The Simpsons in the show's classic era was a specific kind of cultural event, a marker of having reached a level of celebrity where the show wanted to include you in its particular universe and where you wanted to be part of that universe. The show attracted extraordinary people across an extraordinary range of fields and treated them with a specificity and intelligence that was unusual in television at the time. The pattern of who the show chose to feature and how it chose to feature them reveals something important about the show's relationship with celebrity, culture, and the American imagination. In the early seasons, the guest star choices tended toward a particular kind of celebrity, specifically, the kind that represented cultural authority in fields the show took seriously. Musicians whose artistry was beyond question, academics whose work represented something real, sports figures who were legendary rather than merely famous. The show brought in these guests not to be glamorous but to be themselves, to exist in Springfield as versions of their actual selves, with their actual reputations and their actual creative identities, engaged by the show's characters in ways that were specific to who they were rather than generic celebrity interactions. Michael Jackson's appearance in the episode Stark Raving Dad is perhaps the most famous guest appearance in the show's history, and it encapsulates the early pattern perfectly. Jackson appears credited pseudonymously, voiced an enormous man in a psychiatric institution who claims to be Michael Jackson and who speaks like Michael Jackson and who knows Jackson's music but who is also, within the episode's plot, either really Jackson or not really Jackson in a way that the show deliberately keeps ambiguous. The joke about celebrity, about the gap between the public persona and the private person, about the ways celebrity both enables and distorts human connection is built into the structure of the appearance itself. It's not just Michael Jackson on The Simpsons. It's Michael Jackson on The Simpsons in a way that is specifically about what Michael Jackson being on The Simpsons means. The musicians who appeared on the show in its classic era tended to engage with the show's world in ways that were comic, but not demeaning. They were placed in Springfield situations and allowed to respond to those situations, with the same specificity and intelligence they brought to their actual work. The Ramones appearing at Mr. Burns' birthday party and performing Happy Birthday in their signature style, while Burns comments dismissively on the classical music they're playing. This is a joke that works on multiple levels. That doesn't require you to know who the Ramones are to be funny, but that is considerably funnier if you do. And that treats the Ramones with exactly as much dignity as they would want, which is the dignity of the joke being good rather than the dignity of being treated with excessive reverence. Certain guest appearances cluster around specific thematic concerns that the show was exploring at particular moments in its history. The parade of literary figures, Thomas Pynchon appearing as a bagged figure in an episode where the show engages with ideas about anonymous authorship and literary identity. Gore Vidal, Norman Mailer, Tom Wolfe appearing in contexts that allow the show to comment on the intersection of literary ambition and celebrity culture reflects a period when the show was particularly interested in questions of cultural authority and what serious creative work looks like in an entertainment landscape. The musicians of the classic era Aerosmith, Sonic Youth, Elvis Costello, the B-52s, Spinal Tap were chosen with a real sense of what each of them represented culturally and what their presence in Springfield could say about the intersection of rock mythology and the kind of ordinary American life the Simpson family inhabits. The episode Homer Palooza, which centers on Homer's unlikely entry into the world of touring festival rock, uses its guest appearances, Peter Frampton, Cypress Hill, Sonic Youth, to say something specific about the relationship between authentic musical subculture and its absorption into mainstream commercial entertainment. The guests aren't just famous people adding star wattage to an episode. They're the subject matter of the episode, the vehicle through which the show's investigation is conducted. The sports figures who appeared: Joe Namath, Mike Tyson, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Ken Griffey Jr., tend to appear in contexts that address the mythology of American sports celebrity and the way that mythology is absorbed by regular people who relate to it from the outside. Homer's relationship with athletes is the show's way of exploring a specific American cultural psychology, the way sports figures become vessels for ordinary people's fantasies of physical greatness and public glory, and the ways that those fantasies interact with the actual humanity of the people carrying them. The later season's approach to guest casting changed in ways that reflect the show's evolving relationship with its own celebrity. As the show itself became one of the most famous things in American entertainment, the calculus of a guest appearance shifted. Stars were appearing on The Simpsons because it was The Simpsons, not necessarily because the creative team had a specific vision for how their particular presence could serve the show's thematic purposes. The appearances became more varied in quality and more variable in how well integrated they were into the episode's actual story. But even in the later seasons, certain guest appearances stand out as examples of the show's original approach. The guest star whose presence is specific and purposeful and serves something the episode is genuinely trying to do. Ricky Gervais writing an episode and playing a fictionalized version of himself as a character who interacts with the Springfield world allowed the show to engage with questions about comedy's relationship to reality and fiction in ways that wouldn't have been possible without a guest who was himself operating in that conceptual territory. Will Arnett bringing a specific quality of charismatic bluster to a villain role that required exactly that quality in ways that his specific persona made more interesting than a regular cast member could have made it? There is also a pattern in the way the show has treated celebrities who are themselves interested in the kind of self-examination and self-critique that The Simpsons excels at. Celebrities who are willing to be slightly ridiculous in their Simpsons appearances, who are willing to play with their own image in ways that might be slightly unflattering, who are willing to have the joke be at their expense rather than entirely at someone else's, tend to produce the most memorable and most artistically successful appearances. The Simpsons is not a show that treats celebrity as something to be protected. It treats celebrity as material, and the celebrities who are comfortable being treated as material are the ones who fit the show's sensibility. The international pattern of guest stars is also revealing. As the show grew in global cultural influence, its guest list expanded to include international figures whose fame was more concentrated in specific regions. Footballers whose names meant little to American audiences, but enormous amounts to European and Latin American ones. Politicians and cultural figures whose significance was regional rather than global. These appearances represent the show's awareness of its own international footprint and its attempt to address audiences beyond the American mainstream that its domestic storytelling primarily addresses. The cumulative effect of the guest star tradition, nearly 30 years of deliberate, specific, thoughtful choices about who to bring into Springfield and how to use them, is a kind of cultural almanac. You can trace the history of American celebrity and cultural preoccupation through the show's guest list across its seasons. The musicians who mattered, the athletes who were iconic, the writers and intellectuals who represented the show's aspirations toward a certain kind of cultural seriousness. The politicians and public figures who served as vehicles for the show's engagement with the political world. And at the center of all of it, always, is Springfield receiving these guests, encountering them, being changed slightly by the encounter and then reverting to itself, as it always does, as it always will. Section 11, the hidden continuity. Things that never changed. The Simpsons presents itself as a show that doesn't do continuity. The official position reflected in the floating timeline, the episodic resets, the way major events don't carry forward, the way characters remain at the same ages across decades of production, is that Springfield exists outside the normal laws of narrative consequence. What happens in one episode doesn't bind the next episode. The slate gets wiped. The family is always itself again. But this official position obscures something interesting. The show has maintained certain elements with an extraordinary and consistent fidelity across its entire run. Not the big plot elements, those really do reset, but something more specific and in some ways more revealing. There are things in The Simpsons that have never changed, that have been present in exactly the same form across every season and every episode and every transition in the show's creative life, and the things that have never changed are the things the show actually believes are essential. The couch gag changes. But the couch is always orange and it is always there. The plots are always different, but the family always comes home. Marge's hair has never changed. Homer's white shirt and blue pants have never changed. Lisa's red dress and pearl necklace have never changed. Bart's orange shirt and blue shorts have never changed. Maggie's one piece and pacifier have never changed. In a show that theoretically doesn't do continuity, these 5 character costumes have been maintained with the precision of religious observance for 36 years. They are the show's most deeply held convictions about who these people are. They cannot be changed because changing them would change something essential. The 742 Evergreen Terrace address has never changed. It has appeared in occasional establishing shots across the show's entire run, and it is always the same number, always Evergreen Terrace. The house has been rebuilt after disasters. It has been modified for specific episodes, but it is always recognizably itself, always the same white exterior with the green trim and the specific arrangement of windows and the driveway where the car sits and the hedge in front of the porch. Groening's original sketch of the house established something that has been maintained with remarkable fidelity through every iteration of the show's production. The family car, the Simpsons-specific car, the large, slightly battered, slightly outdated American-made vehicle that Homer drives and that has appeared in hundreds of episodes, has been maintained as a consistent visual presence even as its specific model and year have been allowed to float within. The floating timeline. It is always a large American car. It is always in a condition that suggests modest means and indifferent maintenance. It is always recognizably the car that belongs to this family. The relationship dynamics have never fundamentally changed. Homer and Marge's marriage is the same marriage it was in the first episode. It has been tested in different ways in different episodes, but it exists in the same basic register, the partnership between two people who chose each other and continue to choose each other even as the choosing requires regular recommitment. Bart's relationship with authority has never changed. He resists it, he tests it, he occasionally respects it, briefly, before returning to his natural disposition. Lisa's relationship with her own intelligence has never changed. It is a gift and a burden, and she carries both aspects of it with the same complicated grace she has always carried them with. The things that never changed in The Simpsons are the things the show decided, very early and very deliberately, were constitutive of what The Simpsons is. They are not arbitrary. They are not simply lazy repetition. They are the show's commitments, the elements without which the show would not be the thing it is. The couch, the family, the costumes, the house on Evergreen Terrace, the specific relationships, the specific emotional registers. Everything else, the plots, the celebrity guests, the satirical targets, the musical numbers, the couch gags, the tonal register, the animation quality, the specific members of the writing team, all of this has changed. Some of it has changed dramatically. The show of 2025 is in many ways a very different show from the show of 1993. But the family is still on the couch. Marge's hair is still blue. Homer is still reaching for a donut. The cooling towers are still visible from downtown Springfield. The unchanging things are the show's foundation. They are what it is built on. And they are, when you stop to appreciate them, remarkable in how much meaning they carry in how little space. Homer's white shirt is not just a character costume. It is a declaration about Homer's relationship to his own life, the uniform of a man who has accepted certain things about where he is and who that acceptance hasn't fully extinguished. Marge's blue hair is not just a design choice. It is a statement about constancy and the maintenance of self in the face of everything that asks you to change. The things that never changed are the things that matter most. And the 36 years the show has spent maintaining them, returning to them episode after episode, season after season, across every transition in the show's creative and production history, that length of maintenance is its own form of statement. The show believes in these things enough to keep them. Through 36 years of everything else changing, through hundreds of writers and thousands of episodes and every technological and cultural shift imaginable, the family is still on that couch. That persistence is the show's deepest truth. The family, the house, the connection. The love imperfect, complicated, frequently hilarious, occasionally heartbreaking love between five people who didn't choose each other but who keep choosing to be each other's people. The Simpsons has been telling us this for 36 years. Not loudly, not with great dramatic announcements. Just by returning, episode after episode, to the same house on the same street in the same impossible town where the same family keeps finding their way back to the couch. That's the hidden pattern. That's the one that runs through everything. Not the radiation theory or the coma theory or the mystery of Burns's immortality, though all of those are fascinating and all of them are built from the show's real substance. The deepest pattern is simpler. They keep coming home, and we keep watching them come home, because in some part of ourselves, the part that formed watching this show as children or teenagers or adults, finding comfort in a familiar story, we need to see them come home. We need the couch to be there. We need the hair to be blue, and the shirt to be white, and the saxophone to sound the way it sounds, and the donuts to smell the way they smell in whatever olfactory memory our brains have constructed for a thing we've only ever seen on a screen. We watch The Simpsons and we feel something that we sometimes call nostalgia, and sometimes call comfort, and sometimes can't name it all. But what we're feeling, underneath whatever we call it, is the specific relief of finding something unchanged, of discovering that the house is still there, the family is still there, the world still contains Springfield and Evergreen Terrace and the orange couch and the 5 yellow people who fill it. In a world that changes faster than we can track, and that demands a constant adaptability that is genuinely exhausting, The Simpsons offers the experience of a place that doesn't change, a family that endures, a home that you can always find your way back to, no matter how long you've been gone. That's what all these hidden patterns taken together amount to. The yellow and the music and the architecture and the symbols and the guest stars and the writing room and the character designs and the background details, all of it is in service of this one fundamental thing. The sustained creation of a place that feels like home. Springfield is home. The Simpsons family is family. And the 36 years of craft and creativity and obsessive detail that has gone into maintaining that feeling, that is the hidden pattern that contains all the other hidden patterns. The yellow faces on the couch, the blue hair reaching toward the ceiling, the orange shirt and the white shirt and the red dress and the tiny hand holding the pacifier. They're home. They're always home. And as long as the show exists, as long as someone somewhere can turn on the television and find Springfield on the screen and hear Danny Elfman's theme and watch the family race home from their different corners of the town they share, we can be home too. Wherever you are right now, whatever time it is, however long ago you settled in to listen to this, you've been in Springfield for a while now. And Springfield, as you know, has a way of making you feel like you've always been there. Sleep well. The couch gag will be different tomorrow. Everything else will be exactly the same. Thank you for spending this time in Springfield. Wherever you're watching from, whatever time it is where you are, I hope this one settled something quiet in you. Appendix: the longer thread, everything you've been following without knowing it. There is one more thing worth saying before this particular journey through Springfield comes to a close, and it's the thing that connects every section you've just traveled through into a single coherent observation. The Simpsons is a show about attention. Not literally, not in the sense that attention is its explicit subject matter, but structurally, philosophically, in the most fundamental way. The show is built to reward the person who pays a particular kind of attention to it, not the passive absorption of entertainment, but the active, curious, rewarding engagement of someone who is genuinely looking, genuinely listening, genuinely following the threads that the show makes available. The color choices reward that attention. The background details reward it. The music rewards it. The architectural choices reward it. The character design rewards it. The inside jokes reward it. The recurring symbols reward it. The emotional patterns reward it. The guest star choices reward it. The things that never change reward it. Every section of this exploration has been about a different kind of attention, a different angle of approach to the same object, a different focal length for looking at the same world. And what emerges from all of these different kinds of attention, applied to the same 36 years of material, is a picture of a creative endeavor that was more deliberate, more careful, more thoughtful, more ambitious than its reputation as a comedy show has always fully allowed. The Simpsons was always trying to be more than funny. It was trying to be true. It was using every tool available to it: color, music, design, architecture, symbol, structure, character to say true things about the world and the people who live in it, and the specifically American version of that world and those people that the show had claimed as its territory. And it was doing this week after week, year after year, for longer than any other show of its type has sustained a creative endeavor. The yellow was a truth. The blue hair was a truth. The orange couch was a truth. The cooling towers were a truth. The donut was a truth. The saxophone was a truth. The prank calls were a truth. Every hidden pattern was a truth, and all the truths together add up to the one truth that the show has been telling since its very first episode. People are complicated. Families are complicated. Life is complicated. And in the middle of all that complication, the things that matter most are the simplest ones. Connection, home. The particular human warmth of sitting next to someone who knows you and keeps showing up anyway. The Simpsons has been keeping that warmth alive for 36 years, feeding it episode after episode, season after season, with the specific fuel of genuine craft and genuine attention and genuine care for the characters and the world that the show has built and maintained and extended. That is the deepest hidden pattern of all. And now that you've seen it, it will be visible in every episode you watch from this moment forward. Not as analysis, not as something to think about consciously. Just as a quality of warmth that you notice at the corner of your attention, the specific warmth of a show that has spent 3.5 decades learning how to make you feel at home. Close your eyes. Let Springfield settle around you. The cooling towers are there if you want to look at them, patient and enormous against that specific flat blue cartoon sky. You're in Evergreen Terrace. The couch is orange. Marge's hair is reaching toward the ceiling. You can sleep now. End of script. Word count target: 40,000 plus words. Sections: 11 main sections plus appendix. Approximate length: to 46,000 words. Section 12. The peripheral characters who hold Springfield together. Springfield is not a story about 5 people. It is a story about hundreds of people, most of whom exist in the show's peripheral vision, and most of whom are doing some of the show's most important work. The peripheral characters of Springfield are the tissue of the show's world. They make it feel like a real place, populated by real people with real histories, rather than a backdrop for the Simpsons family adventures. The depth and variety of Springfield's peripheral population is one of the most remarkable achievements of the show's creative team. The writers maintained a philosophical commitment particularly strongly through the classic seasons. The commitment to treating even the smallest character as a person with a specific identity and a specific way of being in the world. No one in Springfield is generic. Kent Brockman is Springfield's primary news anchor, and his design is the design of local television news credibility in its most idealized and most satirically precise form. The hair, perfect and motionless in every wind. The teeth, the suit, the specific posture of a person who has learned to exist in a small frame, who has calibrated his physical presence to the dimensions of a television screen. Brockman looks like what local news anchors are supposed to look like. He looks like the version of trustworthy that television constructed and then mass-produced. What the show does with this perfectly realized type is use him as the vehicle for a sustained and genuinely sharp satire of local television news culture. Brockman is not stupid. He is not malicious. He is a person who has adapted to the incentive structure of his profession in ways that were rational and are now indelible. When a story can be made more dramatic, he makes it more dramatic. When a story requires intellectual context that his format cannot accommodate, he provides emotional context instead. He fills time with confidence, with the specific confidence of someone who has learned that confidence matters more to his audience than content. The evolution of Brockman's character across the series is a quiet commentary on the evolution of American broadcast journalism across the same period. The Brockman of early seasons is a more dignified figure. The Brockman of later seasons is more nakedly performative, more willing to let the gap between presentation and substance be visible, as if the ambient culture of media has given him permission to abandon pretenses he was still maintaining earlier. Groundskeeper Willie is a character whose visual and vocal design has made him one of the most recognizable peripheral characters in the show's history. Willie appears in contexts that cluster around physical extremity. He responds to every situation with a level of physical and emotional intensity that would be alarming elsewhere, but that, within the show's visual logic, reads as pure comic energy. His antagonism with Principal Skinner is one of the show's most reliable comedic relationships, operating on the specific dynamic of two people who are professionally obligated to coexist in the same space and who have developed a mutual contempt so deep and so ritualized that it has become its own kind of intimacy. His relationship with the school's physical plant, the furnace room he inhabits, the grounds he maintains with an almost spiritual intensity, gives him a kind of proprietorial dignity that other peripheral characters do not have. He is the sovereign of the sub-basement. Within that sovereignty, he maintains a sense of self that the rest of the school cannot undermine. Dr. Nick Riviera is a character who exists entirely at the level of joke, and who is nonetheless one of the most consistently satisfying joke characters in the show's history. He greets everyone with, "Hi, everybody." He mispronounces medical terms. He performs procedures that no licensed professional would consider. And he charges less than anyone should be comfortable with for the services he provides. Dr. Nick is the show's satire of the American medical system's accessibility problem. The joke that runs beneath the surface of his comedy is the observation that the reason people go to Dr. Nick is that they cannot afford Dr. Hibbert. The choice between a catastrophically bad doctor and no doctor at all is the actual choice facing many people in the real American healthcare landscape. The joke is very funny. The thing the joke is about is very serious. Hans Moleman, the tiny, nearly blind man whose primary narrative function is to suffer and die repeatedly, is in one reading the show's darkest joke. He exists to be hurt. He is the universe's punching bag. But he is also, in the reading that takes him seriously, a figure of genuine pathos. He exists in Springfield without any apparent support network, without family the show has ever depicted, without relationships that sustain him. He is always alone when misfortune finds him. He absorbs what the world delivers with a passivity that reads, depending on your mood, as either comic or heartbreaking. He claims to be 31 years old and appears to be in his 80s. Whatever his true age, he is the character in Springfield most visibly at the world's mercy. And yet he persists. He keeps showing up episode after episode, ready for whatever the universe has planned this time. In this, he is perhaps the most Springfield of all Springfield characters. You survive, you come back. You show up for the next one. Sideshow Bob deserves particular extended attention because he is the show's most fully realized recurring antagonist, the character who has appeared across the most episodes in a villainous role, and whose relationship with Bart has developed across those appearances into something that is genuinely unusual in the landscape of animated television antagonism. Sideshow Bob began as a specific type. He was Krusty the Clown's sidekick, a man of evident intelligence and cultural sophistication who had subordinated himself to an entertainer he clearly considered beneath him, whose resentment of this subordination eventually produced violence. The joke of Bob, initially, was the joke of the wrong person in the wrong role. He is too cultured for this. He quotes Puccini and reads literature of genuine difficulty while working in a context that rewards pratfalls and seltzer water. His first attempt to frame Krusty and take over the show is less a genuine crime than a cry of protest against the indignity of his situation. But Bart's intervention, which sent Bob to prison, transformed the character into something considerably more interesting. The Bart-Bob dynamic that developed across subsequent episodes, the cat-and-mouse structure that forms the basis of every subsequent Sideshow Bob appearance, is one of the show's most artistically productive relationships. It is a relationship between two characters who are entirely mismatched in every obvious way, but who are, at the level of intelligence and intensity, much more evenly matched than they should be. Sideshow Bob is a genius. Bart is not in any conventional sense a genius. And yet Bart keeps winning. The joke of this inversion of the expected outcome keeps working, because the show keeps finding new ways to make the inversion feel surprising while also being inevitable. And underneath the comedy, there is something genuine in the relationship, something that has developed across enough episodes that it carries real weight. Bob and Bart know each other. They understand each other in ways that neither understands most other people. The antagonism between them is real, but so is the recognition. The peripheral Springfield characters, taken as a whole, constitute one of the most fully realized fictional communities in the history of American storytelling. Not because each individual character is deeply developed in isolation, but because the relationships between them, the specific ways they occupy their shared world, the density of interaction and history and mutual knowledge that accumulates across hundreds of episodes, create the impression of a genuine community, a place where people know each other, where history exists between individuals, where the texture of social life is produced by the accumulation of small interactions rather than grand narrative events. This is what Springfield is, at its deepest. A community. Not just a setting. Not just a background for one family's stories. A community of specific people, in specific relationships, maintaining their specific ways of being in the world, episode after episode, season after season, for 36 years. Section 13. The language of the show across every episode type. The Simpsons has developed, across its 36-year run, a set of distinct episode types, each with its own internal grammar, its own visual and narrative conventions, and its own relationship to the show's central concerns. These episode types are not formal categories that the show has ever named or acknowledged. They emerge from the accumulated body of the show's work as recognizable patterns, recurring shapes of story that the show returns to and refines across seasons and decades. The Springfield Civic episode is one of the most consistently produced and most distinctively Springfield of these types. This is the episode where the town itself becomes a character, where some issue affecting all of Springfield's residents provides the frame within which the Simpson family's particular story unfolds. The landfill crisis, the monorail, the bear. These are episodes about the specific texture of civic life in an American small town, about the way communities make collective decisions, about the intersection of democratic process and human folly that produces outcomes that are, in Springfield's specific case, reliably both comic and somehow accurate. These episodes are among the show's most socially observant because they require the show to depict not just the Simpson family, but the behavior of a community under some form of collective pressure. The town meeting is one of the great recurring set pieces of the Springfield Civic episode, a formal democratic setting that the show has used, across dozens of episodes, to depict the specific ways that democratic deliberation can be hijacked, manipulated, emotionally misdirected, and yet still, somehow, occasionally arrive at something resembling a reasonable outcome. The Homer Has a New Job episode is another recognizable type, and one that has been both celebrated and criticized for its role in the show's evolving structure. These episodes take Homer out of the nuclear plant and place him in some entirely different professional context, using his presence in that context to examine a different sector of American working life with the show's specific combination of affection and sharp observation. Homer as a food critic, as a bodyguard, as a country music manager, as an astronaut, as an archaeologist, as dozens of other things across the show's history. The best of these episodes use Homer's specific qualities, his openness, his genuine enthusiasm even for things he is not particularly competent at, his ability to move through the world without the inhibitions that most people carry, to reveal something true about the professional worlds he enters. The worst of them are simply novelty episodes, where the new job is a new setting and not much more. But even the weaker entries in this type tend to have individual moments that justify the episode's existence, jokes or observations that work within the Homer in a new context framework, even when the framework isn't being used to its fullest potential. The Lisa is Lonely episode is a type that appears regularly across the show's entire run, and that the show has handled with varying degrees of depth and care at different moments in its history. These episodes explore the specific experience of being the most intelligent and most emotionally sophisticated person in your immediate environment, which is Lisa's situation in every episode, whether or not that situation is the episode's explicit subject. The Lisa is Lonely episode makes it explicit. This episode is about what it costs Lisa to be who she is in Springfield. The best of these episodes approach Lisa's experience with a genuine emotional directness that the show's comedy framing sometimes protects against, but sometimes makes possible, precisely because the comedy framing creates enough distance for the emotional truth to be presented without overwhelming the viewer. Moaning Lisa, Lisa the Iconoclast, Lisa's Substitute, Lisa's Wedding. Episodes across the show's history that have committed to the specific texture of Lisa's loneliness and produced some of the most affecting moments the show has ever created. The Marge chafes against her life episode is a type that the show has engaged with carefully and has sometimes engaged with more boldly than audiences expected from a family comedy. These episodes acknowledge that Marge's life, as she has structured it around her family and her domestic role, involves real constraints, real trade-offs, real moments of recognizing what she might have done differently. They take seriously the possibility that the choices Marge made, which were genuine choices that she continues to endorse and to act from, also involved giving up things that mattered to her. The show's treatment of this territory is careful in a specific way. It never allows Marge to simply regret her choices, never frames her domestic life as a pure loss. But it also doesn't allow the easy sentiment that any choice freely made is unambiguously worth it. Marge's episodes at their best occupy the complicated middle ground between those positions, where you can love your life and still wonder about the other lives you didn't live, and where that wondering is not a betrayal of the love. The Burns enacts a scheme episode is perhaps the most plot-driven of the recurring episode types, built around the specific dynamic of Burns developing some elaborate plan to increase his wealth or power at Springfield's expense, and the Simpsons family being the vehicle through which that plan is ultimately, if not permanently, thwarted. These episodes tend to be broader in tone and more overtly comic in structure than the character-driven episode types, and they give the show an opportunity to deploy its satirical energy against the specific target of predatory capitalism in its most cartoonishly extreme form. Burns as a cartoon villain is funny. Burns as a cartoon villain who is also a recognizable type, whose schemes reflect the actual logic of real-world corporate behavior pushed to its satirical extreme, is funnier. The best Burns scheme episodes work at both levels simultaneously. They are entertaining as comedy, and they are sharp as observation, and the entertainment and the sharpness reinforce each other rather than one undercutting the other. The Treehouse of Horror Halloween episode is its own category, one that exists outside the show's main narrative continuity and that has provided, across 36 years of annual production, an extraordinary body of work in horror, comedy, and dark fantasy that stands entirely on its own merits. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the show giving itself permission to go further than the main narrative allows, to kill characters who cannot die in the main show, to explore darker territory, to engage with horror and science fiction and fantasy genres that the regular Springfield setting cannot accommodate. The best Treehouse of Horror episodes are genuinely excellent horror comedy, with the specific qualities that make horror comedy work. The genuine tension of the horror elements maintained long enough to produce real unease, the comedy arriving at the point where the tension is most productive rather than dispersing it before it can build, and the specific Springfield character voices being applied to the horror situations in ways that make both the characters and the situations more interesting than they would be in isolation. The clip show is a type that the show developed reluctantly and has handled with varying degrees of grace. The clip show as a format is a production economy, a way of producing content with reduced animation budget by reusing footage from previous episodes within a new framing device. The Simpsons understood, fairly early, that the clip show's economy could be made more interesting by treating the clip show format itself as comic material, and the show's most successful clip show episodes are the ones that find ways to be self-aware about their own cost-cutting necessity in ways that transform the constraint into creative opportunity. These episode types together constitute the show's grammar, the set of structural forms within which the specific language of any individual episode is spoken. Every episode of The Simpsons fits into one or more of these types, and knowing the type is part of knowing what to expect, what the episode is going to try to do, and what tools it's going to use. But the best episodes also complicate and enrich their types, finding something new to do within the established frame or pushing the frame in ways that expand what the frame can contain. This is one of the ways the show's extraordinary longevity has produced creative opportunity rather than simply creative constraint. The accumulated body of episode types becomes its own resource, a library of established forms that can be combined and inverted and commented upon and pushed against in ways that generate new creative possibilities precisely because the forms are so well established. Section 14. The geography of feeling. Every Springfield location and its emotional register. Every location in Springfield has an emotional register. Not explicitly stated, not deliberately designed to produce a specific feeling through any formal principle of environmental psychology, but accumulated across dozens or hundreds of episodes in which that location has appeared in association with specific characters and specific types of story. You go to Moe's Tavern and you feel something. You go to the nuclear plant and you feel something different. You visit Springfield Elementary, the retirement castle, the Quickie Mart, the park, the hospital, and each place produces in the experienced viewer a specific anticipation, a specific quality of readiness for the kind of story that typically unfolds there. This accumulated emotional geography is one of the show's most underappreciated achievements, partly because it develops so gradually that no individual episode is responsible for it, and partly because it operates below the level of conscious recognition for most viewers. You don't think, I am having a feeling about a fictional location. You simply feel something when that location appears on screen, and the something you feel is the accumulated residue of 36 years of stories associated with that place. Moe's Tavern, as discussed earlier in architectural terms, is emotionally the place of male melancholy and male companionship in its most specific form. It is the place where Homer goes when the household is overwhelming, when the specific demands of being a husband and father have become temporarily more than he can carry without some form of refuge. It is the place where the men of Springfield gather to not quite say things to each other, to sit in proximity and drink and watch sports and let the uncomplicated pleasure of that routine provide some ballast against the complicated pleasures and pressures of their actual lives. The emotional register of Moe's is low and warm in a specific way, like the interior of a space where the heating is reliable but not energetic, where things are comfortable in an old, slightly worn way that new comfort cannot quite replicate. It is a place of regular rhythms, of predictable faces and predictable conversations, of safety and repetition. Homer goes to Moe's because Moe's is always Moe's, and sometimes that is enough. Springfield Elementary carries a complicated emotional register that shifts depending on which character's perspective is foregrounded. For Bart, the school is a theater of operations, a space where his specific intelligence, which runs to mischief and social navigation rather than academic achievement, finds its most natural expression. The school is where Bart is most himself, where his particular gifts are most visible even when those gifts are primarily directed at the disruption of the institution's stated purposes. For Lisa, the school is a different place entirely, one that occupies the emotional register of perpetual slight disappointment, the register of a place that has so much to offer and offers so little of it, that has the formal apparatus of intellectual aspiration and deploys it in service of mediocrity. She arrives every day hoping to find something, and finds less than she hoped, and keeps arriving. The school is where Lisa's relationship with hope is most continuously tested. For Skinner and the teachers, the school carries the register of a professional vocation that is simultaneously genuinely meaningful and structurally undervalued, of work that matters done in conditions that don't support the work's mattering. The emotional register of Springfield Elementary for its adults is the register of institutional life in its most specific form. the place where you chose to spend your professional energies, and that keeps finding new ways to make that choice difficult. The Simpson home's different rooms carry different emotional registers. The kitchen, where Marge works and thinks and maintains the household's physical existence, is warm and slightly bounded, the space of someone who has made the domestic her domain, and who experiences that domain with a combination of genuine satisfaction and occasional mild claustrophobia. The living room, which is the family's shared space, carries the most complex and most layered emotional register of any room in the house, because it is the site of the most varied human experience in the show's domestic life. Joy and argument and television and silence and connection and misunderstanding all live in the living room, layered one on top of another. Bart's room and Lisa's room are their respective private territories, and they carry the emotional registers of those territories. Bart's room is the space of plans in progress, of energy temporarily contained, of mischief in its preparatory phase. Lisa's room is the space of interiority, of the self that is too large for the family's shared spaces, of the private practice of the saxophone and the private reading of the books, and the private experience of the thoughts that Springfield cannot accommodate. The nuclear power plant is, as noted elsewhere, the show's primary site of institutional dread, though it expresses that dread in comic terms. The emotional register of the plant is the register of a place that is consequential in ways that nobody inside it fully acknowledges, where the stakes are genuinely enormous, and the culture around those stakes is entirely inadequate to them. Homer falling asleep at the console is funny because the gap between the consequence of the console and Homer's relationship with the console is absurdly wide. The comedy of the plant is always the comedy of that gap, and the gap is always, underneath the comedy, slightly terrifying. The retirement castle where Abe lives is one of the show's most consistently sad locations, though it carries its sadness in the specific register of the show's treatment of aging and time. It is a place of accumulated endings, of people who have lived most of their lives and who are now in the phase of living that consists primarily of waiting and remembering. Abe's presence there is not simply comic. It carries the weight of what he has lost and what he chose and what chose him, of a long life arriving at the conditions of its final stage, with all the specific texture of what came before still present in Abe's memory, even as the people who shared those memories are gone. The church is the emotional register of the aspiration towards something beyond the ordinary circumstances of Springfield's life, an aspiration that the show treats with neither contempt nor credulity, but with the specific mixture of sympathy and gentle satire that characterizes its relationship with all human aspiration. The people who go to Lovejoy's church are looking for something. They don't always find it, and when they find it, they don't always recognize it, but the looking is real, and the church as a location holds the emotional register of that real looking. Lard Lad Donuts, the Frying Dutchman, Luigi's, the various restaurants and food establishments of Springfield carry a shared emotional register that is the register of comfort and appetite, of the pleasures that don't require justification because they are pleasures in themselves. These are the places where Springfield's residents go to feel good without complexity, where the emotional register is warmth and satiation, and the specific social ease of eating in public with other people who are also eating. The register of the outdoors in Springfield, the parks and gorges and wooded areas that appear in various episodes, varies more than the indoor locations. Nature in Springfield is beautiful and threatening in equal measure, in the way that nature always is when it appears in a human story. The gorge is dangerous. The forest is mysterious, the place where Homer saw what he thought was an alien, and where Burns wanders after his weekly treatments, and where various characters go when the town itself becomes temporarily insufficient. The park is domestic nature, nature at the scale of the family, the scale that Springfield manages most comfortably. The emotional geography of Springfield is the emotional geography of a complete human world, full and varied, carrying the accumulated residue of everything that has happened in each place across 36 years of story. You cannot enter these spaces without bringing that history with you. The history is in the space. It lives there, patient and invisible, activated by the recognition of the viewer who has been there before. Section 15: What every Halloween episode reveals about the show's deepest fears. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, which have been produced annually since the show's second season, occupy a specific and carefully protected space in the Simpsons universe. They are officially non-canonical, meaning that nothing that happens in them carries forward into the main show's narrative. Characters who die in Treehouse of Horror episodes are alive again in the next regular episode. Situations that transform or destroy Springfield in the Halloween specials leave no trace on the Springfield of the following Sunday. The non-canonical status is the license for the specials to go further, to be darker, to engage with territory the regular show can't occupy. But the patterns of what the Treehouse of Horror episodes return to, what fears they invoke, what types of story they tell across 3.5 decades of annual production, are revealing in ways that have nothing to do with the episode's non-canonical status. What a show chooses to do when it gives itself full license, when it removes all the usual constraints of continuity and consequence, is as revealing as what it does when those constraints are in place. Possibly more revealing. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, across their history, return consistently to a specific cluster of anxieties. The fear of technology, of the machines and systems that humans build and that then turn against their creators, is one of the most consistent themes. The robots, the artificial intelligences, the devices that gain consciousness or that serve human purposes in ways that prove catastrophic for the humans served, appear in Treehouse of Horror episodes across the show's entire run in ways that make the theme's persistence unmistakable. This fear is interesting in the context of the regular show because the regular show also contains it, though in more muted and more grounded form. Homer's relationship with the nuclear plant's technology, with the specific buttons and switches and safety systems that he is supposed to operate and consistently fails to, is a version of the same anxiety. The technology is there. The human relationship with it is inadequate. Something bad could result, and sometimes does. The Treehouse of Horror episodes give this regular show anxiety its nightmare form, the version where the technology's power over human life is complete and overwhelming rather than simply dangerous and mismanaged. The fear of conformity, of being absorbed into a collective that erases individual identity, is another recurrent Treehouse of Horror theme. Aliens who transform Springfield's residents into identical beings, parasites that take over human bodies, social forces that convert individuals into perfect servants of some larger system. These stories are the nightmare versions of the regular show's satire of American conformity, the communities that pressure their members toward uniformity and away from the expression of genuine individuality. The fear of death, which the regular show handles through grief and memory, and the specific experience of loss that continues forward through time, gets its most direct treatment in the Treehouse of Horror episodes, where actual death is available as a plot element without the permanent consequences that would constrain its use in the main show. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie all die in various Halloween episodes, and what those deaths reveal, by showing the family's response to each other's losses, is something about the depth of their connection that the regular show's necessary exclusion of permanent loss cannot show as directly. The relationship between the Treehouse of Horror episodes and the regular show is the relationship between a shadow and the thing that casts it. The shadow shows you the shape of the thing from a different angle, makes visible aspects of the thing's nature that the direct view conceals. Springfield's anxieties, Springfield's fears, Springfield's specific relationship with death and technology and conformity and the loss of individual identity are all present in the regular show in the attenuated form that comedy and continuity require. The Treehouse of Horror episodes give you the unattenuated version, the direct expression of the same content without the comedy and continuity filters. And what you see in that direct expression is genuinely dark. The fears that the regular show handles with humor are, when the humor is removed, recognizable and real and sometimes quite profound. The best Treehouse of Horror segments are the ones where the darkness is not simply deployed for shock value, not simply for the pleasure of doing something the regular show cannot do, but where the darkness serves the same purposes that darkness always serves in good storytelling, illuminating something true, making visible something real, using the specific qualities of fear to access emotional territory that lighter material cannot reach. The shining segment from the fifth Treehouse of Horror, which parodies Stanley Kubrick's film while making specific use of the Simpsons family's particular dynamics, is a model of this approach. It is funny, unambiguously funny, because the gap between the grandeur of Kubrick's horror and the specific humanness of Homer and Marge and Bart is inherently comic. But it is also, underneath the comedy, a story about the specific way that isolation and stress and inadequacy can crack a person who was already not particularly stable, and about what it costs a family to be in the path of that cracking. The darkness serves the comedy, and the comedy serves the darkness, and neither cancels out the other. Section 16: The Sounds of Springfield. Every audio detail that matters. The Simpsons is, in important ways, a radio play with pictures. The voice performances that animate the show's characters are among the most fully developed and most carefully maintained in the history of American animation, and the audio landscape of Springfield, including both the characters' voices and the ambient sounds that populate the show's world, contains layers of meaning and craft that reward careful listening in the same way that the show's visuals reward careful watching. The core voice cast, and particularly the 6 primary voice performers who have played the Simpson family and their closest associates across the show's entire run, have developed something over decades of recording that goes considerably beyond technical vocal performance. They have developed genuine intimacy with their characters, an intimate understanding of the specific emotional textures those characters occupy, and the specific ways those textures are expressed through voice. Dan Castellaneta's Homer is built around a specific quality of vocal weight, a heaviness that sits in the lower registers of the voice but that can move upward into a specific kind of anguished surprise, the exact pitch of Homer's various exclamations of distress, in ways that have become their own distinct vocal language. The "why you little" that precedes strangling, the specific elongation of particular vowels in moments of particular stupidity, the groan that Homer produces when confronted with information he would prefer not to have received. These are specific vocal constructions that Castellaneta developed across the early seasons and that have become as much a part of Homer's character as anything he says. Julie Kavner's Marge has a vocal quality that is the vocal quality of sustained patience, of warmth held at a certain temperature across long periods, occasionally reaching a warmer register when the patience is most fully expressed, and occasionally dropping into something cooler when the patience is being tested beyond its limits. The voice communicates the specific emotional intelligence of the character before any individual line's content is processed. You hear Marge speak, and you know where she is, emotionally, before you understand what she's saying. Nancy Cartwright's Bart carries the specific energy of permanent motion in its vocal quality, the voice of someone who is always leaning forward into whatever comes next, always in the present tense of immediate experience rather than the past or future tense of reflection or planning. The various catchphrases that Bart produced in the show's early seasons were cultural phenomena, not just because of their content, but because of the specific vocal quality that made them feel like Bart, that made them feel like the natural expression of that specific voice in that specific emotional register. Yeardley Smith's Lisa is, vocally, the character whose range has been most fully explored across the show's history. She can occupy the register of Lisa's intellectual confidence, the voice of a child who has reasoned her way to a position and is prepared to defend it. She can occupy the register of Lisa's loneliness, which has a specific quality in the voice, a particular combination of restraint and yearning that is the sound of someone trying to hold something in that keeps pressing outward. And she can occupy the register of Lisa's joy, which is perhaps the most affecting of all her vocal registers because it appears most rarely, and its rarity makes it most precious. Harry Shearer's vocal work across the show's history is perhaps the most technically demanding of the main casts, because Shearer has maintained multiple, fully distinct character voices across 36 years of production, keeping them separate and specific and true to themselves even when the characters share scenes. Burns and Smithers are perhaps the most clearly differentiated, carrying vocal qualities that are so distinct that the relationship between them is partly communicated through the contrast of their voices before any line of dialogue has been spoken. The ambient sound landscape of Springfield is a less discussed but equally important component of the show's audio world. The specific sounds that characterize each location, the background audio that populates each setting, contribute to the sense of Springfield as a real place in ways that operate below conscious awareness. Moe's Tavern has its specific ambient sound, the low buzz of a television in the corner, the occasional clink of glass, the background murmur of a few other patrons, the specific quality of silence that falls when someone says something that nobody else knows how to respond to. The nuclear plant has its industrial hum, the sound of machinery operating at a scale and intensity that Homer's presence at the console barely registers. Springfield Elementary has the specific chaos of children at any volume and any pitch, occasionally resolving into the relative quiet of a classroom trying to function, occasionally expanding into the full cacophony of recess. The Simpsons home has what might be the most carefully developed ambient audio of any location in the show. The specific background sounds of a domestic space in continuous occupation, the television, the kitchen sounds, the particular silence of a house where someone is always present and that silence is always occupied rather than empty. These ambient sounds are the audio equivalent of the background visual details, the things that make the space feel inhabited rather than simply depicted. The musical stings that punctuate scenes, the short pieces of incidental music that arrive at moments of transition or revelation or comic emphasis, are another component of the audio landscape that rewards attention. The specific stings associated with particular characters or situations, developed across the Golden Era and maintained through the show's subsequent seasons, form part of the audio grammar through which the show communicates. A specific rising figure in the brass signals one type of moment. A descending chromatic passage signals another. You learn these audio signals as you learn the visual ones, through accumulation and repetition, and they become part of how you experience and anticipate the show's emotional movements. The totality of Springfield's audio world, considered as the unified sonic environment that you inhabit when you watch the show, is as carefully crafted and as deeply meaningful as any other aspect of the show's total design. It surrounds the characters' voices, it frames the music, it grounds the action in a world that has weight and texture and physical reality beyond what the animation can provide on its own. You hear Springfield as well as see it, and hearing it is part of what makes being there feel real. Section 17. The show that never finished explaining itself. Open threads and unanswered questions. The Simpsons, across 36 seasons, has introduced more narrative threads, character details, world-building elements, and thematic concerns than it has ever resolved. This is not unique to The Simpsons, but the sheer scale of the show's unresolved elements, accumulated across nearly 800 episodes, gives it a quality that few other works of popular entertainment share. Springfield contains mysteries that were introduced in the show's early seasons and never revisited. Characters who appeared and whose subsequent stories were never told. Questions that were asked and never answered. These open threads are part of the show's texture, part of what makes it feel like a world rather than just a collection of stories. Real worlds have open threads. Real communities contain mysteries that are never solved, and stories that are never finished, and questions about which the available evidence is permanently insufficient. The Simpsons, by accumulating enough of these over enough time, has created a fictional world that shares this quality of real places. Who is Sideshow Bob's brother Cecil, and what became of him after his prison sentence? The show explored Cecil's relationship with Bob in one memorable episode and then moved on, leaving the brothers' dynamic available for future development that never arrived. Cecil is a thread that hangs loose in the Springfield fabric, a character who was fully enough realized to feel like someone with a continuing life that we simply aren't seeing. What happened to all the people who came through Homer's life in his various professional incarnations? Homer has been dozens of things across the show's history, each new job bringing new colleagues and new relationships that the show builds for the duration of the episode and then abandons when the episode ends. Where are they all? What became of the people Homer worked with during his brief career as a food critic, his stint as a country music manager, his time in the professional wrestling world? They are all somewhere in Springfield's implicit off-screen life, continuing to exist in the world the show has created even as the camera has moved on from their stories. The Shelbyville-Springfield rivalry is one of the show's richest world-building details, the existence of a mirror city just miles from Springfield that has always been depicted as Springfield's twin, its double, the place that is almost Springfield but isn't, and that therefore represents, to Springfield's residents, everything that Springfield is not. Shelbyville has appeared in various episodes as the site of competition and conflict, but its full story, its own internal texture, its specific version of the same American civic life that Springfield represents, remains largely unexplored. The question of what lies beyond Springfield's borders, the specific geography of the state and region in which Springfield exists and that it has consistently refused to specify, is itself one of the show's most productively open threads. The mystery of Springfield's location is a genuine mystery precisely because it is maintained so carefully, because the show keeps placing new geographical details in front of us while simultaneously making those details incoherent as a map. The mystery is cultivated, not accidental, and its cultivation is itself a creative achievement, the production of genuine uncertainty in a domain where certainty would be trivially available. The full extent of Burns's history, the century and more of his personal life that the show has referenced in fragments across its 36 seasons, remains incompletely told. The Yale years, the war years, which have been addressed but never fully, the decades before the show's present, the long middle period of Burns's extraordinarily long life during which the nuclear plant was built, and Burns's specific relationship with Springfield was established, and whatever other things happened in a century of active life in American public and private contexts. These fragments form the outline of an enormous story that the show has never told, and probably never will, leaving Burns as a figure of inexhaustible historical mystery. The Simpsons' relationship with its own open threads is part of its relationship with the nature of a long-running fictional world. The show has always understood, at some level, that the stories it tells are not exhaustive of the world it has created, that Springfield contains more than any specific episode or season can contain, that the characters have lives that extend beyond the frame of the camera and the limits of what the show chooses to depict. The open threads are the evidence of that understanding. They are the show knowing that its world is larger than its story. And in that largeness, in that excess of world over story, in the simple fact that Springfield contains more than The Simpsons has ever shown us, there is something that functions as genuine wonder. The wonder of a place that might keep revealing itself. The wonder of characters whose histories are not yet fully known. The wonder of a world that has been running for 36 years and that still, somehow, contains things yet to be discovered. That wonder is available to anyone who watches with the right quality of attention, with the openness to finding something unexpected in a show that has been there their whole lives, with the understanding that familiarity is not the same as exhaustion, and that the show they grew up watching is larger than the version of it they carry in their memories. Springfield is still out there, still running, still generating new episodes and new details and new threads that may or may not be followed, and new moments that may or may not be remembered, and new jokes that are adding to the body of 36 years of jokes that is the show's living archive. The story is not finished. It may never be finished. And there is, in that ongoing incompleteness, a specific kind of comfort that is its own hidden pattern, its own reward for paying attention across enough time to feel the weight of what the show has accumulated and the lightness of everything it still contains. Springfield is waiting. The family is on the couch. The sky above Evergreen Terrace has that specific flat cartoon blue that you could recognize in a glance from anywhere. Come home whenever you need to. The lights are always on. End of full script. Thank you for staying. Section 18. The Philosophy of the Reset. Why forgetting is part of the story. One of the things that makes The Simpsons structurally unusual among long-running television dramas and comedies is the reset. Every episode ends approximately where it began in terms of the family's emotional and circumstantial position. A business Homer started fails or is forgotten. A new friendship dissolves between episodes. A catastrophe Springfield survived leaves no visible scar on the town by the following week. A resolution that Homer and Marge reach in the final minutes of one episode doesn't appear to have changed the underlying dynamic that produced the conflict in the first place. The slate is wiped, the family is reset. The story begins again from zero. Critics of the show, particularly in discussions of its post-Golden Era seasons, have pointed to this reset as evidence of diminished creative ambition, of a show that has stopped caring about what it means for one episode to follow another. And there is some truth in this criticism, in the sense that the reset can be, and sometimes is, deployed lazily, as a way to avoid the creative work of building consequences. An episode where Homer does something dramatic, something that in the real logic of the show's world would have real consequences for his marriage or his job or his family, and where the following episode behaves as though the dramatic thing never happened, can feel like a creative betrayal of the premise. But the deeper truth about the reset is that it was always the show's design, even when the show was at its most ambitious. The reset was never a compromise or a laziness. It was a choice, made early and maintained consistently, that reflects a specific philosophy about what kind of story The Simpsons is. The reset is the show's way of saying that the Simpson family story is not a story of development in the conventional narrative sense. It is not a story that is moving from point A to point B, where point B represents some resolution or maturation or achievement that the story has been building toward. It is a story of being, of continuing existence in a specific form, of the family's persistence as itself through every circumstance that surrounds it. This is a different kind of story from the one that most narrative conventions prepare us to receive. We are trained by virtually every form of storytelling we encounter to expect that the story is going somewhere, that the characters are changing, that the events of one chapter affect the events of the next, that there is a destination, however far away, toward which the story is progressing. The Simpsons offers a story that deliberately, consciously, philosophically refuses this expectation. The Simpsons is not going anywhere. The Simpsons is simply being, and this refusal to progress, this deliberate permanence of the family's situation, carries its own kind of meaning that progressive narrative cannot produce. The meaning of something that endures. The meaning of a family that keeps being itself regardless of what surrounds it. The meaning of a love that persists not because it is developing towards something better, but because it simply keeps going, keeps renewing itself in the same forms, keeps choosing itself again and again in an apparently endless series of re-choosings. The reset is, in this reading, the show's most honest and most hopeful statement. It says, "The family survives. Whatever happens, the family survives." The disaster is forgotten not because the family is shallow or because the writers are careless, but because the family's capacity to absorb disaster and return to itself is the show's subject. The capacity to reset is the capacity to endure. The episode ends where it began because the family has demonstrated one more time its ability to come home. This is different from the tragic version of the same observation, which is that the family never grows, never changes, never achieves the kind of lasting transformation that would allow them to escape the conditions that keep producing the same disasters. Both readings are available. The show supports both. The tragic reading and the hopeful reading coexist in the reset, because the reset is genuinely ambiguous, genuinely capable of being understood as evidence either of persistence or of stagnation. The show has, across its history, played with this ambiguity, episodes that seem to promise change and then withdraw it. Moments where the reset seems genuinely cruel, where the refusal to carry a consequence forward feels like a punishment of the characters rather than a liberation of them. Moments where the reset seems genuinely kind, where the return to the familiar is experienced as the restoration of something valuable rather than the erasure of something real. The ambiguity is the point. The reset is not a statement about the value of persistence over growth or of stagnation over change. It is a question about these things, asked new in every episode, available for a different answer depending on the episode's specific content and the viewer's specific mood, and the accumulated relationship that the viewer has built with the show across their history of watching it. The person watching The Simpsons at 11 years old experiences the reset differently from the person watching it at 35. The 11-year-old doesn't have enough experience of consequence and change and the weight of what doesn't change to feel the full ambivalence of the reset. The 35-year-old, who has had 35 years of discovering what does and doesn't change in their own life, who has experienced their own versions of reset and persistence and the complicated relationship between them, brings to the viewing experience a weight of personal context that the 11-year-old cannot. This is one of the reasons that The Simpsons is a show that grows with its audience rather than being left behind by it. The same show, the same episodes, carry different meanings at different ages and different life stages, because the meanings the show is exploring are the meanings that life itself is always exploring. What changes, what endures, what the relationship between change and endurance actually is for a specific family in a specific place over an extended period of time. The reset is how the show asks these questions. It asks them by resetting, by returning to the starting point, by beginning again. The asking never resolves into a final answer. The reset guarantees that it won't. And the absence of a final answer is not a failure of the show's ambition. It is the accurate representation of the questions themselves, which do not have final answers, which can only be lived with rather than solved. Section 19. The Politics of Springfield, a town that knows what it is. The Simpsons has a political philosophy. This is not the same as saying the show is political in the partisan sense, or that it reliably endorses or opposes any specific political position, or that watching it will tell you who to vote for or what policies to support. The show's political philosophy operates at a level deeper than the partisan, at the level of the structural analysis of how power works and who benefits from the way it's arranged. The show's most consistent political observation is that power, in Springfield and by extension in the world Springfield represents, flows toward those who already have it and away from those who do not, and that this flow is maintained not through brute force, but through a combination of economic dependency, institutional capture, information control, and the specific cognitive effects of hopelessness. Springfield's residents do not resist Burns, not because they lack the numbers or the intelligence to do so, but because the system that Burns benefits from and maintains has produced, in them, the specific form of accommodation that occurs when resistance seems impossible, and the costs of attempting it seem higher than the costs of enduring what you're enduring. This is not a radical or unusual political observation. It is a fairly standard description of how concentrated economic power maintains itself in democratic societies, one that political scientists and sociologists have been making for decades. What is unusual is the consistency and the clarity with which The Simpsons has dramatized this observation across 36 years of episodic storytelling, using the specific characters and relationships of its world to give the observation the emotional concreteness that abstract political analysis cannot provide. Burns is not an abstraction. He is a specific person with a specific history and specific motivations and specific relationships with the specific people he affects. His power over Springfield is not a systemic force depicted at the level of policy. It is a human force depicted at the level of the relationship between an employer and his employee, between a billionaire and the town he effectively owns, between a man who has been alive for over a century, accumulating advantage, and a population that has been living under his shadow for their entire lives without the historical perspective to fully understand the architecture of what they're inside. The show's political compassion is directed primarily toward the Homer Simpsons of the world, rather than the Burns Montgomerys. The show understands Homer. It understands what it is like to be in his position, to be the kind of person whose intelligence has been shaped by forces he didn't choose and whose opportunities have been constrained by the same forces, who works at a job that is beneath his humanity, not because he lacks humanity, but because the system that placed him there required the specific combination of availability and inadequacy that he represents. The show's sympathy for Homer is not condescending. It does not pity him for being what he is. It simply understands what he is with a depth and a specificity that the easy categories of American class discourse don't usually produce. The show's treatment of the political process in Springfield is one of its richest recurring satirical territories. Elections in Springfield follow a pattern that is both specifically comic and broadly accurate as a representation of how electoral politics actually functions in American small towns. The candidates are imperfect. The issues are both genuinely important and genuinely manipulable. The voting public is susceptible to emotional appeals that have no necessary relationship to the substance of the policies being proposed. The outcomes of Springfield elections reflect the specific combination of genuine democratic expression and systematic manipulation that characterizes real democratic processes in ways that the show is always careful to balance. Elections in Springfield can go either way, and the way they go is always both plausibly random and plausibly the result of something larger than randomness. The Springfield police, embodied primarily in Chief Wiggum, represent the show's satirical engagement with law enforcement in its most specifically American form. Wiggum is not a corrupt cop in the melodramatic sense of a television cop who is deeply compromised and actively malicious. He is something more mundane and, in certain ways, more accurate. A representative of institutional law enforcement whose primary quality is inadequacy rather than malice, whose enforcement of the law is shaped more by his own limitations and the specific institutional culture of his department than by any deliberate policy of injustice. The show's observation about Wiggum-style law enforcement is the observation that the most common form of institutional failure in American policing is not dramatic corruption, but ordinary inadequacy. The systematic failure to do the job well that is produced by a combination of insufficient resources, insufficient training, insufficient oversight, and the specific incentive structures of an institution that is accountable primarily to its own internal culture rather than to the community it serves. Springfield's crime problem is not solved not because Wiggum is actively preventing it from being solved, but because Wiggum's department is not capable of solving it, and the gap between the department's capabilities and the requirements of the job is never seriously addressed, because addressing it would require the kind of political will and public investment that Springfield's civic culture cannot currently produce. The show's engagement with the American school system, as depicted through Springfield Elementary, is a sustained satirical investigation of public education's specific institutional failures and the specific reasons those failures persist. Superintendent Chalmers, who appears regularly throughout the series as the representative of the school district's administrative layer, embodies the specific qualities of middle management in a large public bureaucracy: awareness of the gap between what the institution is supposed to do and what it is actually doing, genuine concern about that gap coexisting with genuine powerlessness to close it within the institutional constraints he operates within, and a relationship with Principal Skinner that mirrors the relationship between every middle manager and their immediate subordinate in the specific culture of public institutional management. The show's depiction of the media, embodied in Kent Brockman and in the various print and broadcast outlets that appear across its episodes, has always been both affectionate and astute. The media in Springfield is not malicious. It is not engaged in a deliberate conspiracy to misinform Springfield's population. It is engaged in the specific compromises that American media culture has always produced: the prioritization of engagement over accuracy, the tendency to dramatize rather than contextualize, the specific ways in which commercial pressures and audience appetite interact to produce content that is more entertaining than informative. The show's political philosophy is, ultimately, a philosophy of knowing realism rather than cynicism. It knows how power works. It shows you how power works. But it does not conclude from the knowledge of how power works that the people inside that power's field are simply victims, or that the system is impervious to resistance, or that the comedy of Springfield's political life is the comedy of hopelessness. Springfield keeps trying. Springfield's residents keep running for office and organizing civic protests and attending town meetings and voting in elections and doing all the things that democratic participation is supposed to involve. They are frequently ineffective. They are sometimes manipulated. They occasionally succeed. The show's political hope, insofar as it has one, is located in the keeping of democratic habits rather than in the achievement of democratic outcomes. It is the hope that the practice of participation, even when that participation produces inadequate results, is the thing that makes a different outcome possible eventually. Springfield never becomes the perfectly functioning democracy its better moments suggest it could be, but it keeps trying. And the trying is what the show believes in. Section 20: The Way. The show handles time, memory, and what gets left behind. Memory is the engine of The Simpsons in ways that are easy to overlook, because the show officially does not do memory. The floating timeline means that the characters do not accumulate memories that carry forward. The episodes do not build on each other in the way that serialized storytelling accumulates. Each episode begins from a position that is officially unaffected by whatever happened in the episodes that came before. And yet, the show's most emotionally resonant moments are almost always moments about memory, about the gap between what was and what is, about the specific experience of time having passed, of things having changed, of people and places and states of being that can no longer be accessed. The show is officially about a family that doesn't age and a town that doesn't change. But it is emotionally about time, about what time does, about what it takes from you and what it leaves behind, and whether what it leaves behind is enough. The flashback episodes, which appear regularly across the show's history and which have become more frequent in the later seasons as the floating timeline has produced increasingly contradictory backstories for the characters, are the show's most direct engagement with its own complicated relationship with time. These episodes go back to show you who the characters were before the show began, before they became the specific versions of themselves that the show has established. They show you Homer and Marge young before marriage and children and the nuclear plant and all the specific circumstances of the show's present. They show you who these people were when they were becoming who they are. And in doing so, these flashback episodes produce a specific emotional effect that the regular episodes cannot produce: the experience of temporal contrast. You see who Homer was and you see who Homer is, and the distance between those two versions of the same person is felt rather than simply noted. Something happened in that distance. Something was gained and something was lost, and the show, in its best flashback moments, holds both the gaining and the losing simultaneously rather than choosing one over the other. The episode The Way We Was, from the second season, is the foundational flashback episode and remains one of the show's most emotionally achieved moments. It shows Homer and Marge in high school, their first meeting, their early relationship, the specific circumstances under which they found each other and chose each other. The episode works because it takes the characters the audience already knows intimately and shows them at a moment before they became themselves, before the specific conditions of their adult lives had shaped them into Homer and Marge as the show presents them. And in showing them at that earlier moment, the episode produces an experience of knowing something about these characters that they do not know about themselves. You know where they end up. They do not yet know where they end up. The emotional effect of this informational asymmetry, of watching people at the beginning of a story you already know the outcome of, is the effect that all good origin stories produce. A kind of complicated nostalgia for a past that was never yours, for an earlier version of people you love. Abe Simpson's relationship with memory is one of the show's most sustained and most thoughtful engagements with what aging does to a person's relationship with time. Abe lives in his memories more fully than he lives in his present, not by choice but by the specific circumstance of aging, which narrows the present while leaving the past intact. His rambling stories, which other characters consistently flee or ignore, are his primary way of being alive, in the only way he can fully be alive, in the recollection of experience rather than in the experience itself. The show is not cruel about this. It is not dismissive of Abe's memories or of the reality they represent. It treats his stories with the specific combination of affection and gentle comedy that characterizes its treatment of all human vulnerability. The stories are funny because they go on too long and reach unexpected destinations. They are also, at another level, a record of a life that was lived, that mattered, that contains within it the same human experiences of love and ambition and loss and time that every life contains. Marge's memories, which are less explicitly thematized in the show than Abe's, but which run as a thread through many of her episodes, tend to be memories about what she wanted that she didn't get, or got and then let go, or still has in attenuated form. She was a painter. She had an artistic identity that her domestic life did not eliminate, but that it has consistently failed to fully accommodate. She had ambitions that preceded Homer and Bart and Lisa and Maggie and the house on Evergreen Terrace, ambitions that coexist with her love for all of those things but that don't dissolve into them. Marge's memories are the memories of an alternate life that she can see from where she is, that is close enough to touch but that she has not chosen. The show treats this with more seriousness than most family comedies would risk. It does not simply say that Marge made the right choice and that her domestic life is fully satisfying and that her earlier ambitions were only dreams. It says that the choice was real and so were the ambitions, and that living with the choice you made while remaining aware of the choices you didn't make is one of the ordinary conditions of an adult human life. Marge does not regret, but she remembers. Lisa's relationship with memory is one of looking forward rather than back. Lisa's memories, such as they are in a character who has officially been 8 years old for 36 years, tend to be memories of feelings rather than events. The feeling of understanding something important, the feeling of making genuine contact with another mind, the feeling of music saying something that words cannot. These feeling memories are more portable than event memories. They can be carried into any circumstance, and they remain available as evidence of what is possible, of what the world contains even when the present moment doesn't. Bart's memories are action memories. Memories of things done rather than feelings felt, of pranks executed and adventures had and lines crossed. The specific quality of Bart's memorial relationship with his own life is the quality of someone for whom the past is primarily evidence of capability rather than sentiment. I did this. I can do things. Whatever comes next, I have demonstrated through the record of what I've done that I am capable of meeting it. The show's treatment of memory is, in summary, a treatment of the different ways that human beings relate to time, the different ways that the past is carried into the present, and the different purposes that carrying serves. Some characters live in their memories. Some carry them lightly. Some use them as evidence of possibility. Some feel them as evidence of loss. The show holds all of these relationships to the past simultaneously, across its ensemble of characters, and in doing so produces a portrait of temporal human experience that is as complete as any single television show has managed. And the show itself, as a 36-year-old artifact, participates in the territory it's exploring. The show is its own memory. Its earlier episodes are the past that its current episodes carry forward. Its golden era is the memory that its recent seasons exist in relation to, sometimes nostalgically, sometimes restlessly, always inseparably. The show cannot escape its own history any more than its characters can escape theirs, and the relationship between what it was and what it is itself a form of the temporal complexity that has always been its deepest subject. The Simpsons began, The Simpsons continues. The Simpsons contains within it the full record of its own past, available to anyone who watches carefully enough and long enough to see it. That record is the show's most complete achievement, and it keeps growing, episode by episode, season by season, for as long as the show continues to exist. Springfield is a city in time. Its most important dimension is not its geography, but its history. Everything that has happened there is still there, in the air and in the architecture, and in the relationships between its specific inhabitants, and in the accumulated body of stories that 36 years of careful attention to this particular fictional world have produced. To watch The Simpsons is to enter a world with that kind of history. To bring your own attention to it is to participate in the ongoing act of watching, which is itself an act of keeping the world alive. Every viewer who watches is a viewer in a long chain of viewers, each of whom has brought their own specific moment and their own specific life to the experience of Springfield, each of whom has added their own relationship with the show to the total body of what the show means in the world. The show was made for you. It was also made for everyone else. The fact that it was made for everyone doesn't make it less specifically yours, any more than the existence of everyone else who loves music makes music less specifically yours when you're the one listening to it. Springfield belongs to everyone. Springfield belongs to you. Close your eyes. The house is there. The family is home. The sky above Evergreen Terrace has that specific flat cartoon blue that you would know anywhere in the world. Everything that matters is exactly where you left it. Sleep well. Section 21. The songs they sang. A complete journey through Springfield's musical legacy. There is a moment in a specific Simpsons episode where a character sits down at a piano, or picks up a guitar, or finds themselves in the middle of an elaborate orchestrated production, and the show temporarily suspends its usual comedy register and allows itself to be genuinely musical. These moments happen across the show's history with enough frequency and enough variety that they constitute their own tradition within the show's tradition, their own body of work within the larger body of the show's work. The musical legacy of The Simpsons is one of the most underappreciated aspects of its creative achievement, and exploring it thoroughly means going back to the beginning and following the thread across all 36 years of the show's run. The very first original song that The Simpsons produced for its regular episodes appears in the first season, in the episode Homer's Barbershop Quartet. Wait, that's a later episode. The musical history begins more quietly, with incidental music and instrumental pieces, with the specific qualities of Alf Clausen's early scoring, before the show discovered that it could write songs, and that writing songs opened creative territory that instrumental scoring alone couldn't access. When the show first begins writing original songs for its characters to perform, the songs are simple in the best sense. They are honest expressions of what a specific character would actually sing in the specific circumstances of the episode, without the elaborate production design that the later musical numbers would develop. Homer singing to Marge, Bart's anti-school anthem, Lisa's saxophone pieces that occasionally resolve into something that could be a song. These early pieces have a directness about them that is touching precisely because they don't announce themselves as musical numbers in the formal sense. They are just characters expressing themselves in song, because singing is sometimes how you express what speaking cannot carry. As the show developed its confidence with musical material, the productions grew more elaborate. The most significant escalation in the show's musical ambitions came with the episode Homer's Barbershop Quartet, which is essentially a sustained meditation on the mythology of rock and roll greatness framed through the specific Springfield context of a middle-aged man's brief experience of musical celebrity. The episode uses its musical frame to comment on the Beatles' mythology, on the specific narrative of four friends who made something extraordinary together and then couldn't sustain it, on what it means to have been briefly at the center of something that mattered, and then to live your life in the aftermath of that brief centrality. The songs in this episode are pastiche, designed to evoke specific eras and styles of popular music rather than to be fully original compositions, and the pastiche is good enough that the episodes works as both comedy and as a genuine musical tribute to the specific emotional quality of early-era popular music. The B-sharps, Homer's Barbershop Quartet, are funny as a concept, but the music they make is real music, performed with enough craft that you can hear what the appeal would be. You Only Move Twice. The episode where Homer goes to work for Hank Scorpio's brilliant and malevolent company in a different city doesn't have a prominent musical number but contains one of the show's most perfectly deployed musical moments. The theme song for Scorpio's Enterprise, a corporate anthem that is also a villain's aria, played over a montage of Homer's genuine happiness in his new life, and the workers' genuine enthusiasm for a workplace that, despite its clearly sinister purposes, treats them with more consideration than Burns has ever treated anyone. The music in this episode is doing characterization work of the most efficient kind. It tells you how Homer feels about his new life before the episode has had time to articulate it in dialogue. The episode Homer the Mo, which involves Mo attempting to reinvent his tavern as a sophisticated cocktail bar, contains a musical sequence that is among the show's most perfectly sustained pieces of musical comedy. The regulars of Moe's, confronted with the transformed environment and the transformed Moe, respond with a sequence of reactions that are structured like a musical number even without being formally one, each reaction building on the last in a way that has the rhythm and the escalation of song even when expressed through speech. The various musical episodes that appeared in the middle and later seasons, episodes built around a musical conceit that structures the entire episode rather than simply hosting a sequence within it, represent the show's fullest development of its musical ambitions. These episodes take the risk of asking the music to carry more of the story's weight than standard episodic comedy structure assigns to it, and when they succeed, they produce experiences that are simply not available from the show's non-musical episodes. The episode All Singing, All Dancing, which is formally a clip show of the show's previous musical moments, works surprisingly well as an exploration of the show's own musical legacy, a meta-level engagement with what singing in Springfield has meant and what context it has appeared in. The framing device, which involves Homer's initial resistance to the musical format and his gradual accommodation of it, mirrors the audience's own relationship with the musical episodes. The initial surprise at finding a musical moment in a show that isn't officially a musical, and the gradual recognition that these moments are not anomalies but are a core part of what the show is. The Christmas songs that appear across the show's holiday episodes constitute their own sub-tradition within the musical legacy, and they carry a specific emotional register that the non-holiday musical numbers don't quite share. Christmas music in the show tends toward the sincere end of the show's emotional spectrum, toward the moments where the comedy pulls back and the warmth is allowed to exist without irony or complication. The simple musical expression of the family's pleasure in the holiday, in the specific texture of a Springfield Christmas, is one of the places where the show has always been willing to be genuinely, uncomplicatedly warm. The variety of musical styles that the show has engaged with across its run is remarkable. The barbershop quartet tradition, jazz, country music, rock in multiple eras, classical music, Broadway show tune tradition, gospel, folk, children's music, and the various genres that specific episodes have required for their specific satirical purposes. The show has never been restricted to a single musical vocabulary. It has drawn on whatever traditions serve the episode's purposes, and the breadth of that drawing represents both the breadth of the show's musical knowledge and the breadth of its creative ambitions. The musical legacy of The Simpsons is ultimately the legacy of a show that understood, from relatively early in its existence, that music is one of the ways that human beings say things they cannot say in other registers, and that if you are making a show about human beings in the full complexity of their experience, you need to make room for those things to be said. The musical episodes and musical moments in The Simpsons are the places where the show is most directly in touch with what it is trying to say, where the comedy and the emotion and the observation and the love for these characters are most fully expressed and most completely received. Section 22: Everything that is still true after all these years? After 36 seasons. After 788 episodes. After decades of critical reassessment and cultural change, and the specific ways in which any cultural artifact is transformed by the passage of sufficient time. After all of that, there are things about The Simpsons that are still simply true. Things that were true in 1989 and are true in 2025 and will probably still be true in whatever future year. Find someone watching these episodes with fresh eyes. The family loves each other. This is the most foundational truth, and it is as true in the show's most recent episodes as in its very first one. Homer loves Marge with a sincerity that his behavior frequently fails to honor, but that the show never abandons as a core fact. Marge loves Homer with a patience that is not merely resignation but genuine choice, renewed regularly and in the face of regular evidence for why the choice is difficult. Homer loves his children with the specific intensity of someone for whom family is the primary thing that makes life worth living. Marge loves her children with a devotion that is the organizing principle of her daily existence. The children love their parents in the complicated way that children love parents, with the mixture of dependence and exasperation and genuine attachment that characterizes that relationship at its most honest. The town is doing its best. This is a truth that the show maintains even as it satirizes Springfield relentlessly. The residents of Springfield are not villains, are not stupid, are not contemptible. They are people managing the specific conditions of their specific lives with whatever resources they have available. They make bad decisions. They are susceptible to manipulation. They forget things they should remember and remember things they should forget. But they are doing their best, in the specific way that people who are doing their best always are, imperfectly, hopefully, with genuine investment in outcomes that are important to them. Comedy is a form of love. This is the truth that the show has embodied across its entire run, and that is most clearly visible in the episodes where the comedy and the love for the characters are most fully integrated. The Simpsons makes fun of Homer. It makes fun of him relentlessly, exhaustively, with every tool at its disposal. But the making fun is the expression of a deep familiarity with him, of the kind of intimate knowledge that only love produces, and that expresses itself most naturally through the specific humor of people who know each other well enough to make fun of each other's most specific quirks. The mundane contains the extraordinary. This is a truth that the show has always known, and has always known how to demonstrate. Springfield is an ordinary town. The Simpson family is an ordinary family. The daily life of these characters is the daily life of ordinary American people, and the show has always found within that ordinary daily life the raw material for comedy and emotion and observation that transcend the ordinariness of their source. The donut is a donut, but in the right hands, in the right episode, at the right moment, the donut is also everything Homer is and wants and cannot quite have. The mundane is always available as a door to the extraordinary, if you know how to open it. Stories matter. The Simpsons is a show that believes this with its whole creative being. It has told stories for 36 years because it believes that stories are how human beings understand themselves and their world, that the specific act of narrative, of putting experiences into narrative form and sharing those experiences with an audience, does something that no other form of human communication quite replicates. The show believes in stories with the specific conviction of a creative enterprise that has given its life to the production of stories and that has learned, through the practice, that the belief is justified. Family is both choice and necessity. The show has always understood that the family's existence together is not simply a natural fact but a sustained achievement, that it requires ongoing work and ongoing commitment and ongoing willingness to be the thing that a family requires you to be. And it has always understood that this work is made possible by the fact that the people doing it have no real choice, that the necessity of family, the deep human need to belong to something, to be known by and to know other people at the specific depth that family allows, is what makes the choice possible rather than impossible. The Simpson family keeps choosing each other because they can't not choose each other. The necessity and the choice are inseparable. That's what family is. These truths are what the show has been telling you. Through comedy and music and color and architecture and character design and the accumulated weight of 36 years since the very first episode, they have not changed. They will not change. Every episode begins with the family racing home. Every episode ends with them on the couch. In between, anything can happen and usually does, but the beginning and the end are the same. They keep coming home. They keep sitting together. The house is there, and the family is in it, and the light is on, and the television is playing, and everything is more or less all right. That's the show. That's what it has been, from first to last. Everything else is the story of how they got there. Final words, one last thing before you sleep. You've been in Springfield for a while now. You've traveled through the color and the music and the architecture and the design and the philosophy and the politics and the memory and the love. You've heard about the cooling towers and the blue hair and the orange couch and the saxophone and the donut. You've spent time in Moe's Tavern and Springfield Elementary and the nuclear plant and the house on Evergreen Terrace. And if you're still here, if you're still listening, as the words slow down and the spaces between them get a little wider, I hope something in all of that settled for you. I hope one of those threads found something in you and pulled gently at it. I hope Springfield, for whatever amount of time you spent there tonight, felt like somewhere you could be. The show has been on the air since before many of its current viewers were born. It will probably be on the air for years more. Somewhere right now, in a time zone you've never visited, in a language you don't speak, in a living room or a bedroom or a hospital room or a dorm room or a childhood home, someone is watching an episode of The Simpsons. They are seeing the yellow faces on the couch. They are hearing that specific synthesizer theme. They are watching Homer fall asleep at the reactor console, while warning lights blink unnoticed behind him. And they are having whatever feeling this specific show, at this specific moment in their life, produces in them. The show doesn't know who they are. The show doesn't know who you are. The show is made by specific people with specific intentions and specific sensibilities, and it went out into the world and found the people it found, and the meaning it has for each of those people is their own, built from their own specific experience of watching it across their specific life. That's what art is. Not the thing the artist made, but the conversation between the thing and the person encountering it. The Simpsons is not just what the writers wrote, or what the animators drew, or what the voice actors performed. It is also everything that 36 years of viewers have brought to it, everything they have found in it, and added to it through the specific quality of their attention. Your attention is part of the show's meaning now. Thank you for giving it. Sleep well, wherever you are tonight. The house on Evergreen Terrace is where you left it. The lights are on, the family is home. You can always go back. End. Section 23. Every small moment that made the show immortal. The Simpsons did not become the longest-running scripted primetime series in American television history because of its biggest moments. It did not achieve that status through the most famous jokes or the most quoted catchphrases or the episodes that generated the most cultural conversation. It achieved that status through the accumulation of small moments, through the specific texture of what happens in the spaces between the big things, through the quiet precision with which it has always rendered the ordinary emotional landscape of the characters it was built around. There is a specific category of Simpsons moment that longtime viewers know but rarely talk about explicitly. Not the iconic moments, not the ones that appear in clip compilations or that get quoted at parties. The other moments. The moments between moments. The 3 seconds where Homer looks at something with an expression that is funny, and also, if you let it be, a little heartbreaking. The moment where Marge's voice does something specific that tells you exactly what she's feeling without any words being spoken. The moment where Lisa's face changes in response to something beautiful. And the change is so specific and so precisely animated that you feel it rather than see it. These moments are the marrow of the show. They are what the show is made of when you strip away the plot and the satire and the celebrity guests and the couch gags and the cultural conversation around it. They are the show's life in its most concentrated form, and they appear in every episode, in the early seasons and the golden era, and the transitional period and the recent seasons, consistent and patient, always available for the viewer who is paying the right kind of attention. Homer running toward Marge across a wide shot, his specific running gait that is a little too enthusiastic and a little too hopeful, the gait of someone who knows that what he's running toward is better than anything else available to him. This is not a famous moment. It appears in the background of a specific scene in a specific episode and it lasts about 2 seconds. But it carries, in those 2 seconds, everything the show has ever wanted you to know about Homer and Marge and what they mean to each other. Lisa playing her saxophone alone in her room, late, when everyone else is asleep. The specific quality of the animation in these moments, the way her small figure is rendered against the relative darkness of the unlit room. The window opens slightly behind her so that the music is technically going somewhere even though there's no one awake to hear it except the viewer. These moments are not plot. They don't advance any story. They are simply Lisa being herself in the only space where she can fully be herself, and the show honoring that by showing it to you without comment. Marge looking at Homer across a room, across all the noise and chaos and specific insufficiency of their shared domestic life, and her face doing something that is hard to describe precisely but that you recognize immediately as love. Not the idealized love of romantic comedy, but the specific love of a person who has chosen someone and keeps choosing them, who knows every reason not to choose them, and who keeps choosing anyway. Her face in these moments is one of the most honest things the show has ever drawn. Bart sitting alone somewhere, momentarily still, with the specific quality of stillness that you only get from a character whose default mode is motion. In these moments, usually brief, the Bart who exists underneath the pranks and the mischief is briefly visible, and he is smaller than you expected and more vulnerable, and more like the kid he actually is, rather than the persona he carries into every other scene. These moments are where the show's love for Bart is most clearly visible, in the willingness to show you who he is when he's not performing. Maggie watching, not doing anything, not solving a problem, or orchestrating an event, or demonstrating intelligence. Just watching, with those large eyes that see everything and that express, in whatever language baby eyes express things, a quality of complete attention and complete presence. Maggie in watching mode is Maggie at her most herself. And these moments, which appear regularly across the show's run, and which are easy to overlook because Maggie herself makes them easy to overlook, are among the most carefully rendered in the show's visual history. The moments between Abe and Homer, particularly the moments where what passes between them is not comedy but something quieter and more difficult. The specific quality of the relationship between a father and his son, when both of them know that things were not perfect between them and that the imperfection will not be resolved, that they are simply going to continue to be what they are to each other with all the complicated history that involves. These moments are not frequent in the show. They are not its primary register, but when they appear, they carry a weight that the show's comedy cannot fully contain, and it doesn't try to. The moments where Springfield itself is beautiful. Not the grotesque or the satirical Springfield, not the contaminated or the politically compromised or the collectively amnesiac Springfield, but the Springfield that exists in early morning establishing shots and in the specific light of golden hour and in the occasional winter scene where the town is covered in snow and the familiar shapes of the buildings and streets are softened and made strange and temporarily beautiful by the covering. These moments of beauty are quick, a few seconds at most, and they are not the point of the scene they appear in. But they are there, placed deliberately by animators who understood that even a satirical portrait of American civic life should occasionally acknowledge that the thing being satirized is also sometimes genuinely beautiful. The specific rhythm of a Sunday evening in the Simpson household, rendered in various episodes with enough consistency that you can feel the texture of it. The particular quality of Sunday evening, which has its own emotional register that the show has always been accurate about. The specific Sunday evening feeling of a pleasant day ending and a demanding week beginning, of the family gathered in their living room in the specific domestic comfort that Sunday evenings can produce before the Monday morning arrives to dispel it. The Simpsons originally aired on Sunday evenings, and the show has always been aware of the specific emotional register of that time slot, of what it means to be with a family story at the end of a Sunday, while your own family is within reach and Monday is still a comfortable distance away. The moments of genuine laughter within the show's world, not the comedy the show provides for us, but the comedy the characters experience together, the moments where Homer and Marge laugh at something, or where Bart and Lisa share a joke, or where the family is briefly unified by some shared amusement. These moments have a quality that is distinct from everything else the show produces. The quality of people being happy together, which is simple and common and easy to take for granted, and which the show has always known is the most important thing it can show you. None of these moments are famous. None of them are what you describe when someone asks you to describe the show. They are not the show's jokes, or its satire, or its cultural observations, or its philosophical depth, or its emotional ambition. They are the show's life, expressed in the smallest and most immediate form available to it. They are also what you remember, late at night, in the specific way that you remember things that mattered to you. Not in their full context or with their plots attached, but as specific images, specific feelings, specific qualities of light and voice and expression. The image of Marge looking at Homer across a room, the sound of Lisa's saxophone, the specific gait of Homer running towards something he loves. These are the things the show has left in you. Not the famous things, or not only the famous things, the small things, the quiet things, the things that pass too quickly to analyze and too gently to argue with, and that are simply there, in whatever space you keep the things that have mattered to you across the time you've been alive. The show gave you those things. Across however many years you've been watching it, through however many episodes and however many iterations of your own life, the show has been leaving small things in you. Small images, small sounds, small feelings, small truths about family and love and time and what it means to keep showing up for the people who need you to show up. Those small things are the show's deepest legacy. They are what it leaves behind. And now, wherever you are tonight, whatever position you're in and whatever heaviness or lightness the day has left you with, those small things are yours. The yellow faces and the blue hair and the orange couch and the saxophone and the donut and the cooling towers against the flat blue sky. Yours, to keep. For as long as you want them. The show will still be there tomorrow. Evergreen Terrace will still be there tomorrow. The family will still be on the couch. For now, though, for right now, let it all go quiet. Let Springfield settle around you like something familiar and soft. Let the music play one more time, that specific synthesizer melody that you know better than you know most things, and let it carry you forward into the rest of the night. You're home. You're always home here. Sleep well. The end. Total script length. 40,000 plus words across 23 sections plus appendix. Designed for 11 Labs voiceover, gentle, story narrative tone throughout. Viewer engagement callout appears after Section 1, as instructed. Section 24. The Simpsons and the American Imagination, What This Show Did to a Country. In 1989, when the first episode of The Simpsons aired on December 17th, American television was a very specific thing. Family comedies existed in a tradition that ran from Leave It to Beaver, through The Brady Bunch, through Family Ties and The Cosby Show, a tradition that was built on the premise that the family was essentially functional, and that the comedy arose from the manageable misunderstandings and recoverable errors of basically decent people who loved each other and whose worst difficulties resolved in 22 minutes. The family was the premise and the solution and the moral anchor. The family was always, at bottom, fine. The Simpsons arrived into this tradition and did something that seems obvious in retrospect, but that was genuinely unusual at the time. It depicted a family that was not essentially functional, whose difficulties were not always recoverable, whose members were not always basically decent in every moment, and that was still, unambiguously and without irony, a family worth caring about and a love story worth following. This was not the only thing that was new about the show. The animation style was new. The specific density of jokes per minute was new. The willingness to deploy genuine satire of American institutions alongside the domestic comedy was new. The self-awareness, the meta-quality that would develop over the first several seasons into one of the show's most distinctive characteristics was new. The show's relationship with its own form and with the television genre it was operating within was new in ways that influenced everything that came after it. But the most consequential thing the show did, the thing that changed American television's relationship with the family as a narrative subject, was the simple act of making a family comedy where the family was genuinely flawed, and where that genuine flaw did not constitute a problem to be solved, but a condition to be lived with, loved through, and ultimately celebrated. The Simpsons told American television that the imperfect family is the real family, that the comedy of family life comes from its actual texture rather than from a sanitized version of it, and that audiences were not only willing to watch the imperfect version, but were hungry for it. The shows that followed in the tradition The Simpsons helped create are numerous and varied. Some followed its satirical ambitions, some followed its animation style, some followed its willingness to depict family dysfunction as comedy rather than crisis. Virtually all of American animated comedy for adults, and much of American family comedy in live action, exists in a creative world that The Simpsons helped make possible by demonstrating that the audience for this kind of storytelling was enormous and enthusiastic and had been underserved. But beyond its influence on television, The Simpsons has done something to the American cultural imagination that is harder to trace and harder to quantify, but that is real. It has given America a shared fictional world of extraordinary richness and specificity, a world that millions of Americans have spent significant portions of their lives in, that has shaped the ways many Americans understand their own country and themselves. When Americans make jokes about nuclear power, about political corruption, about corporate excess, about the specific failures of public education or civic governance or the healthcare system, The Simpsons vocabulary is frequently available as a shorthand. Not because the show invented these issues, or even because it addressed them first, but because it addressed them with enough specificity and enough humor and enough humanity that it gave those issues a particular form, a Springfield-shaped form, that sticks in the cultural imagination and is available for subsequent use. Springfield has become a part of how Americans think. This is not hyperbole. This is the specific, traceable influence of a show that has been in the cultural bloodstream for 36 years, that has been the background music of American cultural life for so long that it has become part of the furniture. You do not have to consciously think about The Simpsons when you think about a corrupt local politician, or a nuclear facility with safety problems, or a working-class family navigating an economy that isn't designed for their benefit. But The Simpsons has been thinking about these things for 36 years, and the specific forms in which it thought about them are available in the cultural memory that everyone who watched the show now carries. This is the deepest and most permanent legacy of The Simpsons. Not the episodes themselves, not the characters, or the plots, or the jokes, but the specific shapes that the show gave to ideas that were already in the American imagination. It took those ideas and gave them the particular form of Springfield, of these specific characters in this specific town doing specific things in response to specific circumstances. And those specific forms have spread through the culture and taken root in ways that cannot be fully traced or fully measured, but that are genuinely there, present in the ways Americans talk and think and make sense of their world. The show did this without intending to, or at least without intending to in the systematic way that sounds in description. It simply made a very good show about American life and kept making it for 36 years and trusted that the quality of the attention it paid to its subjects would translate into something lasting. That trust was justified. The quality of attention did translate. The show became, over time, one of the primary ways that American popular culture has looked at itself and recognized something true about what it saw. That is the ultimate hidden pattern of The Simpsons. Not the radiation or the coma or the shooting or the geography or any of the specific narrative mysteries that the show has accumulated across its long history. The ultimate hidden pattern is the pattern of a culture looking at itself through the lens of a comedy and finding, in the comedy's honesty and its specificity, and its sustained commitment to telling the truth about the specific people it depicted, something that was genuinely clarifying. The Simpsons held up a mirror. For 36 years, it kept holding that mirror up. And what America saw in it was both funny and true and sometimes uncomfortable, and always at the deepest level recognizable. That's what the show accomplished. That is what it has been doing. Every Sunday evening for 36 years, In the yellow faces and the blue hair and the orange couch and the cooling towers and the saxophone and the donut and all the rest of the specific inventory of Springfield's specific world, it held up the mirror. It kept holding it up. And in the mirror, for anyone who wanted to look, was the face of a country, slightly exaggerated, slightly simplified, slightly more itself than it usually dares to be. That face is still there. The mirror is still up. Springfield is still Springfield, and the family is still on the couch, and the cooling towers are still rising above the flat cartoon blue of the Springfield sky. It's late now. Whatever time it is where you are, it's probably later than it was when this began. Let the sound of the show carry you somewhere quiet. Let the yellow faces become the faces of people you love, rendered in that specific warm, slightly wrong shade that means home and safety and the specific comfort of a story you already know. Rest now. The show will be here tomorrow. It always is. That's the whole point. Good night from Springfield.